the morning of Alina Voss's 30th birthday. The man she had waited 7 years to marry stood in her father's drawing room and told her he was in love with her younger sister. He did not shout it, he did not even look away when he said it. He stood with his hat in his hands and his eyes steady on her face, and he spoke in the calm, measured voice of a man who had rehearsed the words many times in the dark, and Alina stood very still, the way she had learned to stand still over 7 years of waiting, and she listened to every word as if it were coming from somewhere very far away. But we are getting ahead of the story. Alina was 23, the first time Edward Hartwell came to her father's house. She was sitting alone in the garden at the back of the property, where the rose beds ran along the stone wall, and the light came through the oak trees in long golden pieces. She had a book in her lap. She was not really reading it. She had been sitting there for nearly an hour watching a small brown bird work its way along the top of the wall, and she had been thinking, as she often did in those quiet afternoon hours, about the particular feeling of time passing without anything changing. Her father had guests for the evening. He often had guests. William Voss was a man who filled rooms naturally, who enjoyed the sound of voices and the clink of glasses and the way a dinner table looked when it was set for many people. He had invited half the county, as far as Alina could tell, and the house behind her was already beginning to hum with arrivals, carriages on the gravel, the sound of her mother calling instructions to the kitchen staff, her younger sister Clara laughing at something somewhere upstairs. Alina preferred the garden. She heard the gate open and looked up from her unread book, expecting one of the servants. The man who stepped through was not a servant. He was tall, broad in the shoulders, dressed in a dark coat that had clearly been made for him rather than purchased ready-made, and he moved through the garden gate with the unhurried confidence of someone who was accustomed to arriving places and being welcome. He stopped when he saw her. She did not move. He had dark hair going slightly silver at the temples, a square jaw, and the kind of eyes that seemed to be doing two things at once, looking at you and thinking about something else entirely. He was perhaps 35. He carried himself the way men carried themselves when they had spent years being looked at and had decided somewhere along the way that they were comfortable with it. "I appear to have come through the wrong gate," he said. "The front entrance is on the other side of the house," Alina said. "I know where the front entrance is." He did not move toward it. "I've been here before, several years ago. Your father and I have a long acquaintance." "Then you know the way." "I do." He looked at her with something that was not quite a smile, more like the suggestion of one held back. "You're Alina." She was not surprised he knew her name. Her father spoke of his children the way some men spoke of their horses, with affection and a tendency to describe them to anyone who would listen. "I am," she said. "William speaks of you often." He crossed the garden slowly, the way someone walks when they are not in a hurry and they want you to notice that they are not in a hurry, and he stopped a few feet from her bench. "He says you are the reader. He says that because I am always reading." "Are you reading now?" She looked down at the book, which had been face down on her knees for the better part of an hour. "No," she admitted. He smiled then, a real one. It changed his face completely, made him look younger, made him look like someone who laughed easily when he chose to, which was not often. "Edward Hartwell," he said, and put out his hand. She shook it. His grip was firm and brief. His hand was warm. "Alina Voss," she said, which he already knew, and they both acknowledged this with a small moment of shared amusement before he let her hand go. He stayed in the garden for 20 minutes before someone came to find him. He sat on the other end of the bench, asked permission first, which she had not expected, and was granted it, and they talked about the book she had not been reading, which was a novel she had borrowed from the village lending library and had not yet decided whether she liked. He had read it. He had opinions about it that were different from hers, and he said so plainly, without the elaborate softening that most men used when they disagreed with women about things. She found this refreshing in a way that she would think about later, when she was dressing for dinner. When the servant came to fetch him, he stood and straightened his coat and looked at Alina in that double-seeing way of his. "I hope we'll sit next to each other at dinner," he said. They did not. Her father put her at the far end of the table, as he usually did with Alina, who was not the conversational daughter. But Alina spent the whole of that dinner watching Edward Hartwell talk to the people around him, and she learned things about him from 20 feet away, that he listened as carefully as he spoke, that he was funnier than he looked, that he had a way of giving his attention to whoever was talking that made them feel they were the most interesting person in the room. She went to bed that night thinking about the garden. the warm hand, the unbothered way he had disagreed with her about the book. She did not dream, she did not need to. Waking was interesting enough. He came back the following afternoon. Not for a dinner, not for any occasion she could identify. He simply appeared at the front door at 3 in the afternoon and asked whether Miss Voss might be available for a walk. Her mother, who happened to be passing the hallway when the footman delivered this message, made a face that Alina was not meant to see but did anyway, a face that contained, in its small compression of the lips, an entire sentence. This is unexpected and possibly significant, and we should not make too much of it. Alina put on her coat and met him at the door. They walked for 2 hours, down the lane that ran along the edge of the property, through the village where the shopkeepers looked at them through their windows with comfortable interest, and back along the path beside the river where the willows dragged their branches in the slow brown water. He talked a great deal during this walk. She had expected him to be quieter outdoors somehow, but he was not. He had questions, and he asked them directly, and he listened to her answers with the same careful attention he gave everyone, except that with her it felt different, more focused. He asked about the lending library, about her reading habits, about whether she had ever wanted to travel. She said she had always wanted to see the coast of northern France, which surprised him. He had expected, she could see it in his face, something more domestic in her ambitions. She surprised herself a little too, saying it. She had never said it aloud to anyone before. It was the kind of thing she kept in the private room of herself, along with other things that were easier to feel than to express. He told her about a trip he had made the previous year, not to France, but to the Scottish Highlands, where he had gone after a difficult period of his life that he did not describe in detail, only alluded to with the careful brevity of someone who has decided how much of a thing they are willing to share. He said the Highlands had a way of making human problems feel the right size, small, manageable, belonging to a creature who walked briefly on the earth and should not take itself too seriously. "Is that what you needed?" Alina asked, "to feel small?" He thought about it, actually thought rather than just talking. "I needed to stop feeling so loud," he said at last. "Does that make sense?" It made more sense to her than almost anything anyone had said to her in years. They parted at her front gate. He shook her hand again, the way he had in the garden, brief and warm. And then he said something that she would turn over in her mind for the next 7 years, that she would take out and examine in quiet moments the way you examine a coin you found in an unusual place, not sure if it's valuable, but sure it means something. He said, "I think I'd like to know you better, Alina Voss. I think that would be worth a great deal of my time." He was not looking at the house when he said it. He was looking at her. There was nothing theatrical about it. He said it the way a man says a true thing, simply, without decoration, because the decoration would only get in the way. She went inside. She did not tell her mother what he had said. She went upstairs to her room and sat by the window and watched the lane until there was nothing left to watch, and then she sat there a while longer anyway. At dinner that night, Clara, who was 16 and therefore interested in everything her older sister did or said, asked why Alina was being so quiet. "I'm always quiet," Alina said. "Quieter than usual," Clara said. She had their mother's eyes, very wide and very green, and she had a way of using them that their mother did not openly, directly, with a child's complete lack of self-consciousness about staring. "I went for a walk," Alina said. "With him?" "With Mr. Hartwell, yes." Clara considered this with the grave seriousness that 16-year-olds applied to the affairs of older people. "He's very handsome," she said. "Clara," their mother said, not looking up from her plate. "He is, though. Eat your dinner." Clara ate her dinner, but she kept looking at Alina across the table with those wide eyes full of questions, and Alina looked back at her and felt something she could not name, a small, complicated feeling that had affection in it, and also something that was not quite its opposite but lived near it, something protective and watchful. She pushed it away. It was nothing. Clara was 16 and curious and harmless. Edward came back the following week, and the week after that. By the time autumn had fully arrived and the oak trees in the garden were dropping their leaves in slow spiraling falls, Alina had walked with him a dozen times, had sat across from him at her father's table 4 times, had lent him a book, and received it back with marginalia in his careful handwriting that made her feel seen in a way that was almost uncomfortable. Her mother stopped making that compressed lips face. She had moved on to a different expression, a careful, measured hopefulness that she tried to hide and could not. Her father, who was less careful about hiding things, said one morning at breakfast, "Hartwell seems very taken with you, Ellie." "He is a good conversationalist," Alina said. Said her father, in a tone that meant more than that. Clara said nothing. She had been saying less and less about Edward as the autumn went on, Alina noticed. She had been spending more time in the upstairs sitting room, playing the piano their mother had bought for her the previous Christmas, and the music came floating down through the floors of the house on quiet evenings, careful, practiced, surprisingly good. October was the last time Alina sat alone in the garden before the cold made it uninhabitable. She had gone out on impulse on a Sunday afternoon, wrapped in her heaviest coat, wanting the silence and the smell of the season, rotting leaves and cold earth and the iron smell that meant frost soon. She was not expecting visitors. Edward appeared at the gate. He looked surprised to see her there, which meant it was a genuine surprise. He had come to call at the front door and found no one home, or had been told she was in the garden, she was not sure. He opened the gate and came through it and stood on the path looking at her on the bench, and the light was different in October than it was in August, thinner, cooler, less forgiving, and in that light he looked slightly older and somehow more like himself. "Your father is out," he said. "He's in the village, he'll be back by 4. He nodded. He did not leave. "May I sit?" "You may." He sat. The garden was very quiet. A wood pigeon was working in the oak tree at the back. The smell of the cold was clean and sharp, and the rose beds were finished for the year, brown and skeletal against the wall. They sat for a while without speaking, which was something Alina had noticed about him. He was not afraid of silence. Most people were. Most people filled silence with noise the way people covered bare walls with pictures, not because the pictures were necessary but because the blank wall made them nervous. Edward simply let silence be what it was. After a while he said, "I want to tell you something." She turned to look at him. His expression was serious, the way he looked when he was about to say a true thing and he wanted to be sure the words were exactly right. "I have thought about this a great deal," he said. "I don't say things lightly, as I think you know." "You don't," she agreed. "I am going away. I have business in Edinburgh that will take most of the winter, possibly longer." He paused. "I don't want you to think while I am gone that I have forgotten this." He gestured slightly with one hand, a gesture that seemed to indicate the garden, the bench, the two of them sitting on it, and perhaps everything that had happened over the previous 2 months. "This," she repeated. "Whatever this is," he looked at her steadily, "I believe it is something worth returning for. I would like your permission, your personal permission, not your father's, to return for it in the spring." Alina looked at the bare rose beds. She looked at the oak tree. She looked at the wood pigeon, who had given up on the tree and flown away without her noticing. "You have it," she said. He nodded once. He did not reach for her hand. He did not say anything else grand or sweeping. He simply accepted what she had said, the way a man accepts the truth of a practical matter, with a quiet nod and a settling of the shoulders that suggested he had put something in its rightful place. He left at 3:30, before her father came home. Alina stayed on the bench until the cold drove her inside. She sat with her hands in her lap and the empty garden around her, and she felt something she was not experienced enough to be cautious about, a wide, opening feeling, like a window being raised in a room that has been closed all winter. She did not know, sitting there in the dying October light, that she would sit in this same garden in almost this same position 6 more times before he came back. She did not know that 6 years would pass before the seasons stopped marking his absence and started marking his presence instead. She only knew what she felt in that moment, and what she felt was certain. The lanterns in the garden were not lit that evening. No one had planned to be outside, so no one had thought to light them. Alina walked back to the house through the half-dark, picking her way along the path she knew well enough to walk without light, and she went inside and washed her hands and came down to dinner and ate it quietly, while Clara talked about her music lesson and her mother talked about the neighbor's new conservatory, and Alina did not say a single word about the garden or the bench or the man who had sat beside her in the cold and asked permission to come back. She held it inside her, that certain feeling, like a lamp she was carrying in cupped hands. She did not know yet how long she would have to carry it. She did not know yet how much carrying a lamp in cupped hands costs the person who carries it, how it prevents you from using your hands for anything else, how it asks for your entire attention, how it leaves you in the strange position of standing still while everything around you moves. She would learn all of that. She would learn it slowly, one winter at a time. But on that October evening, going in through the back door of her father's house with the cold garden behind her and the warm kitchen ahead, she did not know any of it yet. She only knew the certainty, and it felt like enough. The first winter was the longest. Elinor had known winters before, obviously. She had lived through 23 of them. But the previous 23 had been winters in which time moved in its ordinary way, in which February followed January the way it was supposed to, in which the cold had an end she could see from the beginning. This winter was different. This winter had a specific thing to end toward, and because it did, it seemed to stretch itself out in all directions, filling more space than winter had any right to fill. She was careful not to become the kind of woman who waits visibly. She had seen those women. She had read about them too, in the novels she borrowed from the village lending library, in the stories her mother told about people they knew or had once known. Women who sat by windows. Women who turned conversations too quickly toward the subject of the one person they were thinking about. Women who held themselves in a particular way, slightly tensed, slightly ready, as if they expected an arrival at any moment and had decided to be prepared for it even when they were eating breakfast alone. Elinor decided she would not be that kind of woman. She was not entirely successful. She read a great deal. She helped her mother with the household accounts, which she was better at than her mother was and which she had quietly taken over in the previous year. She visited the families in the village who needed visiting, the elderly widow at the far end of the lane, the schoolmaster's wife who had just had her third child and was exhausted in a bone-deep way that showed in her eyes. She played cards with her father on Tuesday evenings and was beaten consistently because she could not fully concentrate. She did not go to the garden. She could not have explained why exactly. The garden was cold, yes, and there was nothing to do there in winter, but it was more than that. The garden was where she had last seen him, and visiting it in his absence felt like doing something she was not ready to do, like reading the end of a book before you had finished the middle. Clara filled the house with music that winter. She was 17 now, and she had taken to the piano with a dedication that surprised even their mother, who had bought the instrument primarily to give Clara something to do in the evenings. Clara practiced for 2 hours every morning before breakfast and another hour in the afternoon, and the music came through the floors and the walls and found Elinor wherever she was in the house. It was very good music. Clara had real talent, the kind that could not be taught but only developed, and she was developing it with a seriousness of purpose that Elinor found both moving and slightly puzzling, because Clara had never been serious about anything before. The piano teacher, a thin, precise man who came from the market town every Thursday, told their mother in January that Clara had the hands and the ear of a natural musician, and that it would be a waste not to cultivate them properly. A waste, their mother said at dinner, relaying this conversation with the brightness she reserved for good news. He said exactly that, a waste. She's very good, Elinor said, which was true and which she meant. Clara looked at her across the table. You never say things like that, she said. Like what? Nice things, about me, I mean. Not because you don't mean them, I know you mean them when you say them, but you almost never say them. Elinor considered this. It was a fair observation. I say them when they're accurate, she said. That's the problem. Clara speared a piece of potato with her fork. You could say them when they're approximately accurate too, like other people do. That would be lying. No, that would be being kind. Their mother made a small noise that was not quite agreement with either of them. Their father, who had been listening to this exchange with the comfortable amusement he applied to most of his daughter's disagreements, said, Both, I think. You can be accurate and kind at the same time. It just takes more effort. Elinor thought about this for the rest of the evening. She was not sure her father was right, but she was not sure he was wrong either. It was the kind of thing that sounded simple and turned out, upon examination, to be complicated in small ways that mattered. A letter arrived in February. It was addressed to her father, but her name appeared in it. Edward Hartwell wrote in his careful hand that he had been detained in Edinburgh longer than expected, that his business was proving more complex than he had hoped, and that he trusted the Voss household was well. He extended particular regards to Miss Voss, and said he hoped the lending library had provided adequate distraction through the winter months. Her father showed her the letter. He watched her face while she read it. Particular regards, her father said. He is polite, Elinor said. He is, her father agreed. And then, with the restraint he usually managed but sometimes failed, he is also a man who knows how to say less than he means. Elinor gave the letter back. She went to bed that night and lay awake for a long time in the dark room, and she thought about handwriting, about the specific way a person's handwriting says something their words don't, something about the pressure they put on things, the speed or care of them, the way some letters were formed quickly and others more slowly and deliberately. Edward's handwriting was deliberate throughout, every word given its full weight. She thought, he means more than he says in that letter. She thought, so do I. Spring came late that year. It came in slow degrees, reluctantly, the cold hanging on through March and well into April before finally giving up and retreating. Elinor watched the garden return to life from the window of her room, the roses coming back from their pruned winter shapes, the bulbs pushing up through the dark soil with the particular confidence of things that have been buried and know they will not stay buried. She went back into the garden on the first warm afternoon in April. She brought a book. She sat on the same bench. She read or tried to read, and the afternoon was warm enough to sit in shirt-sleeves if you had them, which she did not, but the sun was on her face and the wood pigeon was back in the oak tree, and the garden smelled like it always smelled in April, like possibility, like something that had been asleep for a long time deciding to try again. She did not hear from Edward in March. She did not hear from him in April. She began, during this period, a kind of internal negotiation with herself that she would carry on in one form or another for the next several years. It went something like this. He said he would return in spring. Spring is a long season. It is possible spring means May or even June in his calendar. It is also possible that when a man says he will return in spring, he means he intends to, which is different from meaning he will. The difference between intending and doing is larger than it seems from a distance. She gave nothing away on the surface of herself. She helped with the accounts. She visited the elderly widow, who had a chest complaint now and needed sitting with more frequently. She played cards with her father on Tuesdays and began winning occasionally because she had reclaimed enough concentration to pay attention. She listened to Clara practice the piano and said, more often than before, when it was accurate, that Clara was very good. Clara seemed pleased by this. She played with more assurance after, as if approval given rarely and sincerely rather than often and casually, had its own specific weight. May arrived. On a Thursday afternoon in the second week of May, Elinor was in the kitchen garden at the side of the house, helping the cook identify which of the herb plants had survived the winter, when the sound of a carriage on the gravel drive made her look up. She made herself not run. She walked around the side of the house at a pace that she hoped looked unhurried. The carriage was already at the front steps, and the door was open, and Edward Hartwell was stepping out of it, taller than she had remembered, or perhaps just more real, the way people are when they return from memory into actual physical presence. He looked up and saw her. He had the same double-seeing eyes. He had, she thought, the same expression he'd had that October afternoon, serious, considering, a man taking stock of something he has been thinking about from a distance, and finding it, upon return, to be exactly as he had left it. "Miss Voss," he said. "Mr. Hartwell," she said, "you're here." "I said I would be." "You did." A silence passed between them that was not uncomfortable. The cook appeared at the side of the house, gave Edward a measured look, and disappeared again with the particular discretion of household staff who have learned to see everything without appearing to. "Your father," he said. "In his study, he'll be very glad to see you." "And you," he said it simply, with that same unbothered directness that she had been carrying around in her memory for 6 months like a stone in a pocket, smooth from the handling. Elinor looked at him, at the eyes, the familiar face, the coat that fit him the way his clothes always fit, as if the clothes understood their job. She felt the wide opening feeling again, the lamp in cupped hands. "Yes," she said, "I'm very glad to see you too." He stayed for 3 weeks. 3 weeks in which he called at the house every other day and twice spent the full afternoon and evening, staying for dinner and sitting in the drawing-room afterward with the whole family gathered around the fire. He and her father talked about the Edinburgh business, about land, about a dispute with a neighboring estate that had apparently been ongoing for a decade and showed no sign of resolving itself. He and her mother talked about the garden and about the new schoolmaster who had come to the village in the winter, and was, according to various opinions, either very good or very young, which might have been the same thing. He talked to Clara about the piano. Alina noticed this. She could not notice it. He asked Clara to play something one evening after dinner, and Clara, who was usually either performing without prompting or refusing to perform at all, sat down at the piano and played a piece she had been working on for weeks, a long, careful piece with a difficult passage in the middle that she had been practicing for the previous month. She played it nearly perfectly. And Edward listened with the same careful attention he gave to everything, and afterward he said, with genuine appreciation, that he had not expected that. "You didn't expect me to be good," Clara said, smiling. "I expected you to be accomplished," he said. "I didn't expect to be moved." Clara laughed. The laugh was bright and unguarded, the laugh of someone who had just been given exactly the right thing. Alina, who was sitting across the room pretending to look at a magazine, held herself very still. She told herself it was nothing. He paid that kind of attention to everyone. That was the thing about him, he made everyone feel like the most interesting person in the room. It was a quality, not a signal. She believed this. She went on believing it through the rest of May and into June, by which point he had gone again, back to Edinburgh, more business, a letter to her father that again extended particular regards to Miss Voss. The summer was better than the winter. She had more to do in summer. The garden wanted attention, and she gave it attention, and there was a satisfaction in that kind of physical work that she had not expected, the satisfaction of a thing that showed its results clearly and directly, that did not require interpretation. A second letter arrived in July. This one was addressed directly to her. It was not long, 4 paragraphs. It told her about Edinburgh in summer, about the way the light fell on the stone buildings at 7 in the evening, about a bookshop he had found in a narrow street that had a particularly good collection of French novels and had caused him to think of her, and about the Scottish countryside he had driven through on a day trip he had taken to clear his head, which had been as clarifying as ever. The last paragraph said, "I find myself in quiet moments reviewing our conversations at some length. I am not a man who reviews conversations as a rule. It seems significant." She read this paragraph 4 times. She did not show it to her mother. She folded the letter and put it in the small wooden box in her dresser drawer where she kept the things she wanted to keep, and she went on with the summer, and the feeling that lived in her chest had a quality now that it had not quite had before, less like a lamp in cupped hands, and more like a lamp set down on a table, steady, burning without effort. She wrote back 3 paragraphs shorter than his, which she hoped read as restraint rather than indifference. She told him about the garden. She told him about Clara's piano progress, because it was true, and because she was still practicing the habit of saying accurate things. She said she had been thinking about northern France and whether she would get there someday. She did not say, "I review our conversations too." She nearly did. She wrote it and looked at it and then took it out of the sentence because it felt too open, too unprotected. She had learned over the previous year to keep certain things inside the private room of herself, not because she was dishonest, because she was careful. That carefulness would cost her more than she knew. He came back in September, and then again at Christmas, and then again in the spring of the second year. And by the end of the second year, the pattern of him was woven into the pattern of her life in a way that she could feel but not quite see, the way you can feel a current in a river even when the surface looks still. The second winter was shorter than the first. The third year was the year she turned down Frederick Hall. Frederick Hall was a solicitor from the neighboring town, not young, not old, precisely average in every quality that could be averaged, and he asked Alina's father for permission to call on her, which her father granted with the careful neutrality of a man who genuinely did not know what his daughter would want, and was wise enough not to assume. Alina told her father, politely and clearly, that she was not interested in being called on by Frederick Hall. Her father looked at her for a long moment. "May I ask why?" he said. He was not challenging her, he was genuinely asking. "I don't think we would suit," Alina said. "You've met him 3 times. "I have, I don't think we would suit." Another long moment. "Alina," her father said, with the careful tone he used when he was about to say something he had been sitting with for a while. "I am not telling you what to do, I would never tell you what to do, but I want to ask you a question and I want you to think about it honestly." "All right," she said. "Is there a specific reason you are not interested in Frederick Hall, or any other reason you might not be interested in any man you meet at present?" She met his eyes. He was not asking to be cruel. He was asking because he loved her, and because he saw things in his quiet, comfortable way, and because he was, beneath the sociability and the dinner parties, a perceptive man. "Yes," she said, "there is a specific reason." "And is that reason aware of being a reason?" She thought of the letter in the wooden box. "I find myself reviewing our conversations." "I believe so," she said. Her father nodded. He said nothing more. He did not warn her as another father might have. He did not press. He simply accepted what she had told him and went back to his newspaper. And Alina went back to the garden. And the question sat between them after that like a piece of furniture. They both moved around without discussing. She turned down Frederick Hall. She turned down in the year after that a man named George Ashby, who was younger and kinder and would have made by most measures an excellent husband for someone. She did not say why to George Ashby. She simply said she was not in a position to receive callers at this time, which was both true and untrue in the way that polite answers are. Clara watched these refusals with those wide, serious eyes of hers and said nothing. Clara was 19 now, and then 20, and then 21, and she was no longer a child in any sense that mattered. She had grown into herself in the years since Alina had first noticed her watching from the upstairs window. She had found some solid ground inside herself, some place she stood that was hers, and it was the music. The piano had given her something that Alina recognized but could not have named precisely, a self, something to return to. She was also, Alina noticed with the same complicated feeling she always pushed away, very beautiful. Not in the way their mother was beautiful carefully, consciously, but in the way of someone who has not yet learned to manage the effect they have on rooms. She walked in and the room arranged itself differently. She laughed and people turned toward the sound the way plants turn toward light, automatically, without deciding to. Alina had never envied Clara this. She told herself she had never envied Clara this. She told herself this on a Tuesday evening in the 4th year of waiting, when Edward came for dinner and sat across the table from Clara, and Clara said something about a concert she had attended in the market town, and Edward laughed that real laugh, the one that made him look younger, and Alina watched his face and felt, for the first time, a small cold thing under her ribs that was not certainty and was not hope and was not quite fear. It was just a Tuesday evening. It meant nothing. She poured herself more water. She listened to her father tell a story about the disputed land in Edinburgh which was apparently still ongoing. She ate her dinner. She was gracious. She was always gracious. That night she lay awake and had a conversation with herself that she ended before it could go anywhere useful. And in the morning she went to the garden and pulled weeds for 2 hours until the complicated feeling under her ribs had dissolved into simple tiredness. The roses bloomed that year the best they had bloomed in years. She cut them and put them in vases throughout the house, one on the kitchen table, one in the drawing room, one on her windowsill where it opened slowly over 3 days and then held its shape for a week before it began to drop its petals one by one onto the painted wood. She watched the petals fall. She counted them without meaning to. She stopped counting before she reached the number she did not want to reach. The 5th year, the 6th. Time moved the way it moved when you were waiting for something, faster in retrospect than it had felt while passing, so that looking back you could barely account for how you had filled it. She had filled it with books and accounts and garden work and visiting and card games with her father and listening to Clara play the piano. She had filled it with letters sent and letters received, with careful sentences that said more than they appeared to and slightly less than they meant. She had filled it with 2 more refused callers and the growing, careful silence of a household that had decided, collectively and without discussion, not to press her. She had filled it with faith in a man who had told her he was coming back. And he had come back, again and again. Every spring or summer or autumn he came back and sat in the garden or at the dinner table or by the fire, and the things between them accumulated the way things accumulate when 2 people spend years talking to each other about the things that matter, layers of understanding, of shared reference, of a specific shorthand that only exists when you have paid attention to someone for a long time. She believed in it. She believed in what it was. She had stopped asking herself whether she was right to believe it. That was the part that cost her. Not the waiting, the deciding not to ask. On the morning of her 30th birthday, she went to the garden before breakfast. It was June, everything was flowering. The roses were extraordinary that year, deep pink, almost red, the petals thick and close set in the way that meant the blooms would last. She stood among them and felt the morning on her face and thought about nothing in particular, just the garden and the light and the smell of the roses, and she felt in that moment entirely at peace. She did not know that in 3 weeks, everything she had been carrying in cupped hands would be put down, not set gently, put down hard by someone else's hands. She did not know it. She stood in the garden on her 30th birthday and looked at the roses and breathed. It was enough, for that morning it was enough. He arrived on a Thursday in late June, a week after Eleanor's birthday, and the way he arrived told her something was different before he said a single word. It was not the carriage, that was the same. It was not the coat or the hat or the way he stepped down from the step with his usual unhurried certainty. It was something in his face when he came through the front door, something behind his eyes that had not been there before, or that had been there but contained, and was now less contained than usual. Eleanor was in the drawing room when he arrived. She heard his voice in the hallway, heard her father's answering warmth, heard the sound of coats and hats being dealt with by the footman. She sat where she was and did not go out to meet him in the hall, which was unusual. She would normally have gone out, and she stayed with that unusual choice for a moment before she understood it. She was not sure, from the sound of his voice alone, that she wanted to see his face yet. He came in 2 minutes later. Her father was with him, which was normal. Her mother appeared from somewhere, which was also normal. Clara drifted in from the music room. The piano had been going all morning, stopping and starting with the repetitive precision of someone working on a difficult passage, and they all settled into the comfortable formation of a household receiving a familiar guest. Edward sat across from Eleanor. He looked at her. The double-seeing eyes, but today the second thing behind them was closer to the surface than usual, crowding out whatever it normally hid itself behind. "You look well," he said. "Thank you, your journey was good." Straightforward, he paused. "I should have written ahead. I came earlier than I planned." "We're glad of it," her father said. He meant it. He always meant it when he said he was glad of Edward. The afternoon passed in its usual way, more or less. Tea was brought. Conversation moved through its comfortable channels. The Edinburgh situation, which had finally, after a decade, been resolved in Edward's favor. A new road being built between the village and the market town that everyone had opinions about. A book Eleanor had been reading that she and Edward fell into discussing with the ease of people who have been discussing books together for years and have developed a particular rhythm for it. But something was not right. Eleanor was not certain of what it was, only that it was there, a small, incorrect note running under the afternoon like a fault line under a flat field, invisible unless you knew to look for it. Edward was attentive and warm and funny, as he always was. He listened to everyone the way he always did, that full, careful attention. But twice during the afternoon she caught him looking at Clara, and it was a look she had not seen on his face before. Or perhaps she had seen it. Perhaps she had seen it at the edges of previous visits, and had put it in a drawer marked not applicable, and closed the drawer and not returned to it. She was returning to it now. Clara was playing the piano again after tea. She had gone back to the music room with the quiet dedication she always had about her practice, as if the world could wait, and the music came through the wall, and Edward turned his head slightly toward the sound. Just slightly, the way you turn your head when you hear something you recognize. It was a small movement. It probably meant nothing. Eleanor watched it and filed it, and felt the small cold thing under her ribs expand by 1 degree. He stayed for dinner. The evening was pleasant. Her father was in excellent form, telling stories about the Edinburgh legal proceedings with the comic exaggeration that always indicated he was enjoying himself thoroughly. Her mother had organized a particularly good meal. Clara was animated and funny, full of a story about a letter she had received from a friend in London who had been to see an orchestra perform, and described it in terms so overblown and theatrical that even Eleanor, who did not usually find this kind of thing amusing, smiled at it. Edward laughed at the orchestra story, the real laugh. After dinner, in the drawing room, Clara played again. The difficult passage she had been working on all morning, she had it now, or nearly had it, the technical problem solved and the music able to come through the notes rather than being stopped by them. It was remarkable, actually. Eleanor sat and listened, and felt something that was absolutely genuine and absolutely painful at the same time, because Clara was genuinely extraordinary, and also because when the last note died away, and the room was quiet for a moment before the applause of the family, Eleanor looked at Edward's face. She looked at it for only a second. She looked away again quickly. But a second was enough. He had not heard a performance, he had been moved, and not in the way a person is moved by skill or by beauty in the abstract. In the way a person is moved by something they already care about. Elinor folded her hands in her lap and looked at the window. She told herself that night in the careful dark of her room that she was misreading things. She was 30 years old and she had been waiting for 7 years, and she was projecting. She was taking a look on a man's face, one look, lasting 1 second, and constructing from it a narrative that suited her anxiety rather than the truth. She was being foolish. She was allowing 7 years of careful hope to make her paranoid. She mostly believed this. In the morning she woke early and went to the garden before anyone else was up, and she pulled weeds in the cool morning air and thought about nothing and everything, and by the time the household began to stir she had talked herself back to reasonable ground. People could admire Clara without it meaning anything specific. Edward admired many people. He paid attention to everyone. It was not particular. He came back 2 days later. He came back the day after that. He had not, in 7 years of coming back, come back on consecutive days. He had been measured and deliberate about his visits, always spacing them so that each one felt like an occasion rather than a habit. This new frequency was different. Elinor noticed it the way you notice a change in the weather, not dramatically, but in the body, in a vague, persistent awareness that the conditions had shifted. On the 3rd consecutive day she came downstairs to find that he had arrived before she was dressed, and was sitting in the drawing room with her father. Clara was in the music room, her mother was with the cook. Elinor stood in the hallway for a moment outside the drawing room door, listening to her father's voice and Edward's voice moving through their familiar conversational rhythm, and she felt something that she identified only after a moment as resistance, a pulling back, an unwillingness to go into that room. She went in anyway, because she was not the kind of person who acted on unwillingness when acting on it would require explanation. He was very warm to her that morning, warm in the particular attentive way that was his. He asked about the book she was reading. She had a new one, the French novel she had ordered from the bookseller, and they talked about it for 20 minutes with genuine pleasure. And during those 20 minutes she almost succeeded in convincing herself that she had been wrong about the look on his face, that she had invented the whole thing out of anxiety and tired hope. Then Clara appeared at the drawing room door. She was wearing a blue dress that Elinor had not seen before. She had flowers in her hair, not deliberately, one of those small accidents of a morning in the garden, a stem that had caught in her braid, and she was slightly flushed from whatever she had been doing outside. And she looked, in that doorway, effortlessly, thoughtlessly beautiful in the way of someone who has not yet learned to know it. She looked at Edward. He looked at her. It lasted barely 2 seconds. It was nothing in duration. It was the kind of moment that would not be recoverable in memory later, too brief, too ordinary on the surface, two people's eyes meeting in a doorway, nothing that could be pointed to. Elinor did not look away, she watched both of them. And then Clara smiled, her wide, unguarded smile, the one that had not learned caution, and came into the room and said something cheerful about the weather, and the moment was over, and conversation resumed, and Elinor sat in her chair with her hands in her lap and felt the small cold thing under her ribs solidify into something she could no longer dismiss as anxiety. She knew what she had seen. She did not say so to anyone, she did not say so to herself, not fully, not yet, but she knew. The week that followed was the week she understood what it meant to carry something with nowhere to put it down. She could not tell her father, who would either dismiss it or be distressed by it, and neither response would help. She could not tell her mother, who would try to manage it and make it worse. She certainly could not tell Clara, who was either innocent of what Elinor suspected or guilty of it, and either way was not the right person to tell. She could not tell Edward, obviously. She had no one to tell. This was the moment she felt for the first time the cost of the waiting, not the years themselves, but what the years had done to her social world. She had declined friendships the way she had declined callers, not deliberately but through the same mechanism, the preference for her own company, her own garden, her own books. She had the elderly widow, now 80 and increasingly unwell. She had her father's companionship, which was real and warm but had limits. She had Clara, and whatever Clara had become in the last year or two, she could not use that. She was alone with what she knew. She kept it inside the private room of herself and went on being Elinor, the composed one, the reader, the one who helped with the accounts and visited the sick and played cards on Tuesdays with her father. She went on being gracious. She was very good at grace by then, 7 years of practice. Edward came again the following Tuesday. He did not come through the front door this time. He came through the garden gate. Elena was not in the garden. She was at her window on the second floor, and she saw him come through the gate, and she saw that he paused just inside it, looking around with the expression of someone who has been hoping to find a particular thing and has not found it. He stayed for 30 seconds in the garden looking, then he went around to the front door. She stood at her window and thought, he was looking for me. And then, like a second note played immediately after the first, or he was looking for her. She did not go down for another 10 minutes. She needed the 10 minutes. She stood at the window and looked at the garden below, the roses, the oak tree, the bench where she had sat with him in October 7 years ago when he had said he was coming back, and she let herself feel the full weight of what she was looking at. And then she straightened her back, she put her hands at her sides, she went downstairs. He was in the drawing room with Clara. Not alone, her mother was there too, across the room, working on something at the small desk she kept by the window. But Clara and Edward were on the settee near the fire. Clara turned slightly toward him, and the conversation stopped when Elena entered, stopped in the way conversations stop when they have been intimate rather than ordinary, when the intimacy needs a moment to rearrange itself into something suitable for company. Her mother looked up from the desk, Edward stood, Clara sat back slightly. Elena, her mother said, "We weren't expecting you." "I live here," Elena said pleasantly and sat down. The conversation that resumed after that was careful and general, and entirely without the quality it had had when she walked in. She sat in it and felt it and said nothing about what she felt, and after an hour Edward left and she went to the kitchen garden and pulled every weed she could find until her back ached and her hands were dirty, and the complicated thing inside her had been reduced by physical exhaustion to a simpler, quieter hurt. That evening Clara played the piano for a long time after dinner. She played as if no one was listening, which was the way she played when she was working something out in herself. The music went on in the next room, and Elena sat by the fire with her unread book, and her father dozed in his chair, and her mother knitted, and the house was full of sound that had no words in it. Elena looked at the fire, she thought about October, the garden, the bench. The wood pigeon. He said he was coming back, he came back. She thought, that is true, he came back. She thought, but I did not ask him what he was coming back for. She had assumed for 7 years with the certainty of someone who had been told a true thing and had not considered that true things can be true in more than one direction. He had said this was worth returning for. She had understood it to mean herself. She had perhaps been the only one who understood it that way. The fire burned down, her father woke and said good night. Her mother folded her knitting. The piano stopped, the house went quiet. Elena sat alone by the dying fire for another 20 minutes. She sat very still, the way she had learned to sit still over 7 years of waiting, except that this time the stillness was not hope holding itself in position. This time the stillness was a woman sitting in a room she had always known, understanding for the first time that she had been waiting in the wrong direction. She did not cry. She was not the kind of person who cried easily, and she was not going to begin with this. She got up, she straightened her dress. She put the fire screen in place and turned down the lamps and walked through the quiet house to the stairs, and she went up and she went to bed. She did not sleep for a long time. But she was very still, she was always very still. It was the thing she was best at. And it was the thing that had, she understood now, kept her exactly where she was for 7 years while everything around her moved. The betrothal came on a Wednesday. Not because Wednesday was a significant day, or because anything particular had prepared the ground for it. It came on a Wednesday because that was the day Edward Hartwell drove to the Voss estate in the early afternoon, asked to speak with William Voss privately, and spent 30 minutes in her father's study, while Elena sat in the garden and pulled dead heads off the roses with the patient attention she always brought to tasks she could do without thinking, because thinking was something she needed to manage carefully just then. She had known it was coming. She had known it in the way you know something is coming when you have been paying attention for long enough, not through any single piece of evidence but through an accumulation of small things, each of which was innocent on its own and together made a pattern you could not pretend was accidental. The consecutive visits, the change in the room when Clara entered it. The way Edward spoke to Elena, still warm, still attentive, but with something that was very slightly different from before, a quality that she could not name except by saying it was the difference between a man who is fully present and a man who is fully present and also thinking about something else. She pulled dead heads off the roses and felt the June sun on the back of her neck and waited. The French windows of the drawing room opened, and her mother stepped out into the garden with the expression on her face that Alina had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. It was not a complicated expression. It was the face of a woman who had been asked to go and tell her daughter something that the woman hoped would be good news, but could not entirely account for why she was not sure. "Your father would like to see you in his study," her mother said. Alina looked at her mother's face for a long moment. Her mother held steady under the look, but only just. "All right," Alina said. She set down the handful of dead blooms she had collected and wiped her hands on the small cloth she kept in her apron pocket, and followed her mother through the French windows and across the drawing room and to the door of her father's study. She knocked. Her father said, "Come in." She went in. He was standing behind his desk, not sitting, which was unusual. He stood the way a man stands when he is not sure whether the news he is about to deliver is good or difficult. Edward was not in the room. She registered this first, the absence of him, and felt something that might have been relief and might have been disappointment, and was probably both. Ellie, her father said. He never called her Ellie in formal moments. The word did something to her throat. "He spoke to you," she said. He did. Her father came around the desk and stood facing her, and she saw in his face the same careful hope her mother had been carrying all summer, held now alongside something more complex, a question he had been asking himself for 30 minutes, she thought, about whether what he was about to say was the right thing. "He's asked for your hand," her father said. Alina stood still. "He was very clear," her father went on. "He spoke well. He said, and I'm telling you his words because I think they matter, he said he has great respect for you and great affection, and that he believes a life built alongside you would be one he would be glad of." She heard this. She heard every word of it. She went through it carefully, the way she went through everything, the respect, the affection, the gladness of the life. She noticed what was not there. "He didn't say love," she said. Her father looked at her, a long, careful look. "No," he said, "he didn't use that word." "Did you notice?" "I noticed." Alina looked at the bookshelves behind her father's head. The books she had grown up with, the natural history volumes, the law books, the novels her mother had read before she stopped reading novels, the atlas with the cracked spine. She had grown up in this room in a sense, learning the world from these shelves, and she felt the room around her the way you feel a place you have always known when you are standing in it, and something is different. "Did he say anything else?" she asked. Her father considered this for a moment in the way he considered things, genuinely, without hurry. He said he had spent several years determining what he wanted, that he was a man who took his time with important things, that he did not intend to waste either your time or his own. She thought, he took his time with me, and he used that time to want someone else. She did not say this. She could not have said this yet, could not have even fully let herself think it yet, because thinking it fully would have required dismantling something she was not ready to dismantle. "What did you tell him?" she asked. "I told him I would ask you." She looked at her father. He was watching her with the love of a man who has spent 30 years trying to understand a daughter he admires and has never quite fully cracked, and in this moment she felt that love so clearly it was almost a physical thing, something she could have put her hand on. "Thank you for asking me," she said. "Of course." She stood for another moment in the study. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked. Outside the window the garden waited in its summer abundance. "I'll speak to him," she said. Her father nodded. "He's in the drawing room." She went to the drawing room. He was standing by the window, looking out at the garden, she noticed, not at the door. He turned when she came in. He had that serious expression. The one she had learned over 7 years was his real face, the one underneath the warmth and the humor and the careful attention. She sat down. She gestured to the chair across from her. He sat. "My father has told me what you asked," she said. "I should have spoken to you first," he said. "I considered it. I thought the formality was appropriate. Perhaps I was wrong." "Perhaps," she looked at him. "Edward." "Alina." "Tell me what you feel," she said. "Not what you intend, what you feel." He looked at her with those double eyes, and she saw something in them that she had not expected, not calculation, nothing cold. Something that looked like genuine pain, like a man who is about to say a true thing and who is sorry for what the true thing costs. "I feel a great deal for you," he said. "I have for years. I believe it is a real thing what is between us." She waited. "I also believe," he said slowly, "that a good marriage is built on more than what is between us. It is built on what two people make together, and I believe we could make something good." She heard the architecture of these words, the way they were built. "You are describing a partnership," she said. "I am. Not a love." The pause before he answered was the most honest thing he had said to her in 7 years. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds she understood several things she had not fully understood before, and the understanding was not like a door opening. It was like a door she had always known, was there finally stopping pretending to be a wall. "I love you," he said, "as a person I deeply respect and admire, as someone whose company has meant a great deal to me over a very long time." "But," she said. He looked at her. "There is a but in there," she said. "I can hear it." He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, with the care of a man who has decided honesty is more respectful than evasion, "I am not certain the kind of love I feel for you is the kind I had not yet felt until recently." The room was very still. Elinor looked at the fireplace. The fire was not lit, it was June, there was no need, and the grate was clean, empty, the kind of empty that is just absence rather than loss. She looked at it for a moment. "I accept your proposal," she said. He looked at her. She could see in his face the surprise he was trying to contain. "Elinor, you asked a respectful question. You were honest with me, which I appreciate and which most men would not have been." She folded her hands in her lap. "You said you believe we could make something good. I believe that too. I have believed it for 7 years." She paused. "And perhaps the kind of love you are uncertain about is also uncertain in me, and we are both simply people who express things carefully." He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "You deserve more than that." "I am 30 years old," she said. "I am not being practical out of desperation. I am being practical because I have thought about it for a long time, and I believe that respect and affection and the genuine wish to build something together is not nothing. It is quite a great deal." He accepted this. She could see the moment he accepted it, a small settling in his face, a decision made. "Then I am honored," he said. The wedding date was set for 3 weeks hence, the 1st of July, which was a Thursday, which meant nothing except that it was the nearest Thursday available. Elinor's mother began organizing immediately, with the focused energy she brought to occasions that required managing, and the house shifted into the particular mode of a household preparing for an event. Lists, instructions, the sound of furniture being moved in rooms that needed clearing, the smell of something baking in the kitchen that was a trial for the cake. The dress was ordered. Ivory silk, which her mother had already begun discussing before Elinor had confirmed anything, because her mother was a woman who planned ahead and had been planning this particular event in her head for several years. The seamstress came on a Thursday morning and took measurements and made small professional noises of approval at Elinor's figure, which was, she said, very well suited to the cut she had in mind. The first fitting was 2 days later. Elinor stood on a small wooden platform in the seamstress's front room and held her arms slightly away from her body while the woman moved around her, pinning and noting, and Elinor looked at herself in the long mirror and felt, with some clarity, that she was looking at a woman she recognized but could not fully reach. The woman in the mirror was composed, upright. She had good posture, always had, the result of a childhood in which posture was considered a form of manners. Her face was calm. She looked like a woman who knew what she was doing. She held her breath throughout the fitting. She did this without being aware of it. The seamstress mentioned it on the second visit. "You hold your breath, dear, when I'm measuring. Try to breathe normally or the fit won't be right." Elinor had been genuinely surprised. She had not known. She breathed after that, carefully and deliberately. She was always careful and deliberate about the things she noticed. Clara helped choose the flowers. This was Elinor's idea, because she wanted Clara involved, because Clara had an eye for these things, and Elinor did not particularly want to spend hours looking at flower arrangements when she was already spending all her mental energy on other things. Clara threw herself into the flower question with the enthusiasm she brought to everything she cared about, and spent 2 afternoons with a woman from the village who could supply flowers from her considerable garden, and came home both afternoons with samples and suggestions and a specifically pleased expression that was genuine and warm. It was real. Clara's enthusiasm for helping was real. That was the part Elena could not look at directly. If Clara had been triumphant or guilty or guarded, Elena would have known what to do with it. But Clara was simply herself, helpful, warm, invested in her sister's happiness with what appeared to be completely uncomplicated sincerity. Elena watched her and thought, "She does not know that I know." And then she thought, "Or perhaps there is nothing to know." And then she thought, with the cold clarity that came to her in the hours between 2 and 4 in the morning when the house was entirely silent and there was nothing to be distracted by, "I know what I saw. I have known it since June. I am choosing not to name it because naming it would end something, and ending something at 30 after 7 years is the most terrifying thing I can imagine." She was afraid. She understood this. She was, for the first time in 7 years, genuinely afraid, and she had been dealing with the fear by doing what she always did, being still, being composed, going forward, making decisions, being gracious. She was very gracious at the dinner 2 weeks before the wedding, when Edward sat at their table as her intended, and her father raised a glass and her mother pressed her hand, and Clara played something beautiful on the piano afterward that made everyone quiet. She was gracious when she looked at Edward across the drawing room that evening, and he looked back, and she saw in his face the careful warmth of a man who was doing his best. She was gracious when Clara came to say good night and kissed her on the cheek and said, with her wide eyes full of something that Elena could not fully read, "I'm so glad for you, Ellie." Elena said, "Thank you, Clara," and meant it. Terrifyingly, she mostly meant it. The dress had its final fitting 6 days before the wedding. It was finished. It was beautiful ivory silk, the cut the seamstress had imagined, perfectly suited. Elena stood on the small platform and looked at herself in the long mirror and remembered to breathe and thought, with a clarity that was almost peaceful, "In 6 days I will wear this dress." She did not think and be happy. She thought and moved forward. She had been moving forward her whole life. She was very good at it. Whatever came, she would move through it with grace and stillness and the particular quiet strength that she had built carefully over 30 years of practice. She did not know yet what was coming. She got down from the platform, she changed back into her ordinary dress, she went home. The roses in the garden were blooming with a stubbornness that she found, that evening, almost moving, the way things bloom on schedule regardless of what the people standing among them are feeling. She cut 3 stems for the drawing room and 3 more for the kitchen table. She set them in water. She watched them open slowly in the warmth of the house. 5 more days. She could feel them in her chest like a count. The night before the wedding, the house was full in the way houses are full when something significant is about to happen in them, not just with people who came and went all day, the neighbors and the relatives who had traveled and the seamstress making a last adjustment, and the cook managing the kitchen with the particular controlled urgency of someone who has too much to do and has organized herself to do it, but full with something in the air, a thickness, an altered quality of light and sound that you could not quite account for. Elena moved through it all with the practiced ease of a woman who had spent 30 years learning to be useful in the middle of other people's business. She arranged things. She answered questions. She thanked people for their good wishes with a warmth that was genuine enough to pass for the complete thing. She ate when food was placed in front of her and drank when her glass was filled and smiled when smiling was called for. And by 7 in the evening, when the last of the daytime visitors had gone and the house had settled into the quieter preparation of the evening, she was very tired in a way that was not physical. She sat with her mother after dinner for an hour. Her mother talked about the flowers. Clara's choices had been received very well. The arrangements would look beautiful in the church, and about the weather forecast, which was good, and about the family who had come from a great distance and was staying at the inn in the village, and about how pleasant everything was going to be. Her mother was managing herself through this evening, with the method she always used for managing herself through things, keeping the practical details moving, filling any silence that might allow for feeling with more practical details. Elena let her. She sat and listened and contributed where it was expected of her and thought, privately, about the things she had been not thinking about for the past 3 weeks. Clara had not come down for dinner. She had sent a message through the upstairs maid at 6:30. A headache, she was sorry, she would be better in the morning. Their mother had sent up a cold compress and some broth and a message that she hoped Clara would feel well. Elena had said nothing. She had eaten her dinner with the conversation going around her, and she had thought about headaches. She was not a suspicious person by nature. She had spent 30 years trusting the surface of things when the surface was reasonable, because most of the time the surface of things was accurate and suspicion was simply exhausting. But she had also spent the last several weeks noting things, accumulating them, the way you accumulate evidence you do not want to use, and Clara's headache on the evening before the wedding, after weeks in which Clara had been unusually warm and helpful and present, had the specific quality of a thing that was true and also not the whole truth. A headache could be a headache, of course it could. Elena sat with her mother until 9. Then she said good night, and her mother pressed her hands and looked at her with the teary, tender expression she had been managing all evening, and said something about how beautiful tomorrow would be. "Thank you, Mother," Elena said. She went upstairs. She changed into her nightgown, she braided her hair. She did these things with the precision of habit, the same order every night, the same motions, the body knowing what to do without being asked. She sat at her dressing table and looked at her face in the mirror, and her face looked back at her, composed and a little pale and entirely in possession of itself. She looked at the vase on the windowsill. She had cut roses from the garden that afternoon, 3 stems, and put them in the blue glass vase that had been on her windowsill since she was a child. The flowers had opened during the day. They were a dark pink, almost red, with the thick-petaled heaviness of full bloom. They looked very well. They smelled of summer and of something older than summer. She looked at the flowers and thought about how to arrange them. She tried 1 stem forward and 2 back. She tried 2 forward and 1 to the side. She tried turning the vase so that the largest bloom faced the window instead of the room. She tried moving the vase 6 inches to the left. She moved it back. She moved it again. She was not thinking about the flowers. She sat down on the edge of her bed. The house was quiet now. The servants had gone to their quarters. Her father was already asleep. She could hear faintly the sound that meant he was sleeping, a small rhythmic reassurance through the wall of the room next to hers. Her mother's room was down the hall. Clara's room was at the end, past the bathroom, past the linen cupboard. Elena looked at the door of her room. She thought about going to knock on Clara's door. She thought about what she would say if she did. She thought about the conversation that might happen, the one she had been not having for 3 weeks, the one in which the thing she had been keeping in a drawer marked not applicable was finally taken out and examined in the light with another person present. She thought about what Clara might say. She thought about what she might learn. She stood up from the bed. She stood in the middle of her room for a long moment, in the quiet house, in her nightgown with her braid down her back, and she felt the full weight of the night around her, the particular heaviness of a night that separates what has been from what comes next. She had felt this kind of night before, though not about anything this large. The night before examinations. The night before her father's illness 2 years ago, when the doctor had come and they had waited until morning to know. The night before things that mattered. She stood for 2 minutes, then she sat back down on the edge of the bed. She was not going to knock on Clara's door. Not because she was afraid of what she might learn. She was afraid, yes, but that was not the reason. The reason was something more complicated than fear. The reason was that she was 30 years old, and tomorrow she was getting married, and she had made a choice, a real choice, with real information after real consideration. And she did not want to unmake it in the middle of the night based on a suspicion she had no proof of and might have constructed from anxiety and exhaustion and the particular quality of a headache on a significant evening. She was not going to undo herself tonight. She would wait. Not the old waiting, the 7-year waiting, the lamp-in-cupped hands waiting. Different. This was the single night between one life and another, and she would pass through it the way she passed through hard things, by being still and being composed and trusting the morning to bring what it would. She turned off the lamp on her nightstand. The room went dark. She lay down, she pulled the sheet up. It was warm July, she did not need more than a sheet, and she looked at the ceiling that was just visible in the slight moonlight coming through the curtains. The ceiling she had looked at for 30 years. The particular plaster shape above the window that she had as a child decided looked like a running hair and had never been able to see as anything else. The hair was there. She breathed. She thought about the morning. She thought about the dress, hanging in the wardrobe on its hanger, the ivory silk that had been fitted 3 times to be exactly right. She thought about the church, which she knew well, had known since childhood, the particular quality of light through those windows in the morning when the sun came in from the east and fell across the stone floor in long warm slabs. She thought about standing in that light. She did not think, quite deliberately, about the alternative, about what it would mean if the thing she had been keeping in a drawer were true. She set that thought down on the floor like a heavy thing she had been carrying and left it there. Tomorrow she would pick it up again if she had to. Tonight she was going to rest. She closed her eyes. The house settled around her with its familiar sounds, the small creaks of old timber, the distant sound of the clock in the downstairs hall marking the quarter hours, the summer night outside the window moving very gently. A bird called once and then was quiet. She was almost asleep when she heard it. A sound in the corridor, very quiet, barely there, the kind of sound you register without quite waking, the body noting it and filing it while the mind continues down toward sleep. But it was there. The soft movement of someone in the upstairs corridor, which was not unusual. The house had people in it, people moved, except that it was past 11 and everyone was in bed. Or should have been. She lay very still, she listened. The sound moved away from her door. Down the corridor in the direction of the back stairs. It stopped, then nothing. She lay in the dark and listened to the nothing. After a minute she heard it again, coming back not from the back stairs now but from further away, from the direction of the back landing. Coming back along the corridor, pausing, continuing. A door opened and closed very quietly, Clara's door at the end of the hall. Silence. Elena lay in the dark. She lay there for a long time after that, with her eyes open and the ceiling above her and the faint moonlight on the curtains and the clock marking the quarters downstairs, and she did not sleep. She did not try to sleep after a point, because she understood that sleep was not available to her now. She lay there and she thought. She thought with the coldness that came to her when everything soft in her was occupied with something too large to be soft about, when the only faculty available was the one that simply looked at things and called them what they were. She had not imagined what she saw in June. She had not been projecting or anxious or foolish. She had seen what she had seen. She had chosen to set it down and walk past it. She had made a real choice with real information. The house was completely quiet now. She turned onto her side. She looked at the vase of roses on the windowsill, barely visible in the dim light, just a shape, a darkness that was flowers against the lighter darkness of the window. She had moved them 4 times, and they had never looked right. She understood now why not. No arrangement of those flowers on that windowsill was going to look right tonight. There was no right arrangement. The problem was not the flowers. The problem was the night. The problem was what the night contained. She closed her eyes again. She thought, in the morning I will get dressed and go to the church. She thought, whatever happens tomorrow, I will be composed. She thought, I have been composed for 30 years. It is the most reliable thing about me. The clock struck midnight. One day became another. Elena lay in the dark and felt the day change under her and thought, so, it is today now. She did not decide anything in those hours. She did not make any resolutions or change any plans or determine anything about the future. She simply lay there and breathed and let the night do what nights do, pass, slowly, and then less slowly. And then with the sudden acceleration of the small hours when dark begins to thin at the edges, and the birds begin before the light. The first bird called at 10 to 4. By 5 the room was lighter. By 6 Elena was awake in the way you are awake after a night that has not really been sleep, not rested but sharpened, cleaned out, ready for something though she could not have said for what. She got up. She washed her face in the cold water in the basin. She put on her dressing gown. She did not go to the window. She sat at her dressing table and looked at herself again in the mirror and thought, today I am going to be a bride. She had believed that for 3 weeks. She believed it still. What she did not believe, in that early morning light, looking at her own steady face in the mirror, was that she had been entirely wrong about what she had seen in June, or what she had heard in the corridor at 11 o'clock. She did not know yet exactly what she knew. She would know soon enough. The birds were very loud outside the window. July birds, full summer, committed to the morning, no ambiguity about whether the sun was going to rise. It rose. It was, as her mother had hoped, a beautiful day. Her father came to her room at 9:30. Not her mother, not the maid with the dress. Her father, who knocked twice in the way he always knocked, twice, with a pause between, as if giving her the option of not being there, and waited. Alina was at the dressing table. She had done her hair. She was in her dressing gown, the ivory dress hung in the wardrobe, still in its cloth cover, waiting. "Come in," she said. He came in. He stood just inside the door, which he had closed behind him, and he looked at her in the mirror rather than directly, and she understood from this small choice that he was not sure how to do whatever he had come to do, and that looking at her reflection was somehow easier than looking at her face. He was not a man who found things difficult very often. He had an easy way with the world, her father. An ease that was not carelessness. He felt things, she had always known this, but a quality of settling into whatever room he was in, whatever conversation he was having, whatever situation required managing. He was settled in most circumstances. He was not settled now. "William," she said, because she had called him William on the rare occasions when she needed him to know she was taking something seriously. He looked at her properly then, in the mirror, and then directly, turning from the door to face her. "There has been a development," he said. She had known something was coming. She had been sitting at this dressing table for 40 minutes since dressing, doing her hair very carefully, and she had known, in that way she had learned over 30 years to trust, the body's knowledge that ran under the mind's knowledge and was usually more accurate, that something was coming. "Tell me," she said. "Edward is downstairs." He paused. "He has asked to speak with you privately before the ceremony." The room was very quiet. She looked at her own face in the mirror, the composed face, the face that had been composed through many things and was going to be composed through this too. "All right," she said. "Ellie," her father took a step toward her. "Whatever he says to you, I want you to know, whatever he says, and whatever you decide after he says it, I am your father and this house is your house, and there is no outcome of this morning that changes that." She turned from the mirror and looked at him properly, the real him, the man she had been looking at her whole life, the man who had never pressed her, never warned her, never told her she was wrong to do what she had done. He was looking at her now with an expression she had not seen on him before, a raw parental anguish that had broken through the usual careful management. "You know," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I believe I know what he is going to say," he said carefully. "I do not know the extent of it. I only know that something is wrong." He looked at her with those eyes that were her eyes, the same shape, the same steady quality. "I should have said something before this. I saw things over the summer that I told myself were not my business. They were my business. You are my daughter." She stood up. She put her hands at her sides. "Don't," she said gently. "Please don't. You didn't do anything wrong by not telling me things I already knew." He blinked. "You knew." "I knew something. I didn't know what." She straightened the dressing gown. She was very calm. She was calmer than she had any right to be, and she understood, distantly, that this calm was not peace but the particular state her body went to when it was managing something too large for normal feeling. "I'll go down." "You don't have to." "I know." She crossed the room to the door. He moved aside for her. She paused next to him. "William," she said, "whatever he says, I will be all right." He pressed her hand, once hard. She went out. She went down the stairs. The hall was empty. Her mother was somewhere in the back of the house. The servants were busy. Clara was wherever Clara was. The house had the charged quality of a place waiting for an occasion that had not yet started, everything arranged and ready and holding itself in position. The drawing-room door was closed. Alina opened it. Edward was standing in the center of the room. He was not in the wedding clothes yet. He was wearing his everyday coat, which told her something about how this morning had begun for him, that he had not gone to the church first and then come here, but had come here first, before dressing, which meant that whatever he was about to say had required him to get here before he could do anything else. He turned when she came in. His face was the face of a man who has been sitting with a decision for a long time and has made it, and is now on the other side of it, in the place where you carry the decision and all of its consequences. He looked tired. He looked sorry. He looked, she thought, with a clarity that surprised her, like a man who is about to do a hard and honest thing and knows it. She sat down. She chose the chair nearest the window, the one she always sat in, the one from which she could see the garden through the glass. She sat with her back straight and her hands in her lap, and she looked at him. "Sit down," she said, "please." He sat. They looked at each other for a moment. 7 years of looking at each other had made this easy under normal circumstances. They had sat together in many rooms, many silences, and the silences had never been uncomfortable. This silence was different. This silence had a shape to it. "I owe you the truth," he said. "Yes," she said, "you do." I have genuinely tried, Alina. I want you to understand this. I have tried to be as clear with myself as I have been with you. I told you when I proposed that my feelings were not entirely simple. You were generous about it. You were generous in a way I did not deserve." She waited. "Over the course of the last several years," he said, "my feelings toward Clara have become, what they have become is not something I planned or sought or am proud of. I want to be very clear about that. I did not come back to this house in order to find anything other than what I told you I was coming back for." She listened to every word. She filed them away with the same care she had always given his words. "But feelings are not entirely in our control," he said. "And what I feel for Clara it is what I did not know I was missing when I described to you the kind of love I was not certain about. I understand that now. I understand it because I feel it, and because feeling it has shown me the shape of what was not there before." He stopped. The room was so quiet she could hear the clock, the tick of it, steady, entirely indifferent. "She feels it too," he said. "I am not telling you this to hurt you further. I am telling you because you deserve to know the whole truth and not a version of it." She said, "I see." 2 words. She had 2 words in her at that moment, and they were those 2. Everything else was inside her in some form she could not reach yet. "I am deeply sorry," he said. "I am sorry for the years, all of them. I am sorry for what you gave me and what I am doing with it. I am sorry that I did not understand myself well enough 7 years ago to know that what I was feeling was admiration and affection, but not the thing it needed to be." He stopped. His hands were in his lap. He was looking at her face with an honesty that cost him something. She could see this, that he was not enjoying this moment, that he was doing it because it was the only right thing to do, and he had finally made himself do it. "I have no right to ask you anything. But I am asking if you can forgive me. Not now, I don't expect it now, but eventually." She was quiet for a long time. She looked at him. She looked at the man she had given 7 years of her life to, who was sitting in her drawing room on her wedding morning, and telling her with genuine pain and genuine courage that he had fallen in love with her younger sister. She thought, "I knew." She thought, "I have known for months." She thought, knowing it and hearing it are completely different things, and I was not prepared for this difference. The cold thing under her ribs was not cold anymore. It was something she did not have a word for, not quite anger, not quite grief, not quite the feeling of the floor going out from under you, but some combination of all 3 and something else as well, something that she would not be able to name until later, until she had had time to sit with it. Something that was also, strangely, a kind of relief. "Did my father know?" she said. "I spoke to him this morning before I came to you. I thought it was right to speak to him first." "You spoke to Clara?" He was still, "Yes." "When?" "Last night." He paused. "I should have done this before last night. I should have done it weeks ago. I did not. I was hoping for something to shift. I am not proud of that either." She looked at the garden through the glass, the roses, the oak tree, the bench which was just visible at the far end of the path, the same bench it had always been in the same position. "You need to go," she said. He stood immediately. "Not from the house," she said. "I mean you need to go to Clara. If what you are telling me is true, you should be with her." She paused. "You should not be here explaining yourself to me." He looked at her. She saw in his face something she did not expect, something like awe or something close to it. "Alina." "Please go," she said, not unkindly. "I need to be alone." He went. He crossed the room and opened the door and went out of it, and his footsteps went down the hall, and the front door opened and closed, and then there was nothing but the clock. Alina sat in her chair by the window. She sat in her wedding morning dressing gown in the drawing room that she had sat in for 30 years, in the house she knew as well as she knew herself, and she looked at the garden, and she felt the thing under her ribs move through her in a slow, enormous wave. It was not what she expected. She had expected, if this moment ever came, and she had thought about it, in the small hours, She had let herself think about it. She had expected to feel broken. She had expected the devastation that comes when the thing you have been building your life around turns out to have been built on ground that shifted while you were looking away. She felt all of that, she felt it completely, she would feel it for a long time. But she felt something else too, arriving at the same moment in the same wave. It came alongside the grief and was real, and she would not push it away. She felt the precise, stinging relief of knowing. Of finally knowing the full truth of a thing rather than the partial truth she had been carrying for months. She had been carrying a suspicion that had no right to speak until it was given permission, and now it had spoken, and it was terrible, and it was also finally, mercilessly honest. And after 7 years of careful words and managed emotions and letters that said slightly less than they meant, there was something almost like air in the terrible thing. She put her hands over her face. She held them there. She did not cry, her eyes burned. Her hands were very cold against her face, which was strange because the room was warm. After a while she took her hands down. She looked at the garden. Somewhere in the house a door opened. She heard her father's voice, low, too low to make out words, and then her mother's voice, and then silence again. She looked at the garden for a long time. The roses were extraordinary this year. She had thought that before, and she thought it again now, with the part of herself that was always present even when everything else was somewhere else entirely. The roses were extraordinary. They bloomed with complete indifference to the morning's events, as roses do, as everything in gardens does. She thought, I have sat in this room and this garden for 30 years. She thought, I do not have to sit here tomorrow. The thought arrived with no plan attached. It was just a thought. But it had a quality she had not felt in. She counted backward and could not quite count far enough. It had a quality she had not felt in years. It felt like possibility. She sat with it. She did not trust it yet. She was not going to let herself trust anything today except the chair under her, and the garden outside the glass, and the clock on the mantelpiece ticking on with its complete animal indifference to what happened to the people in the room with it. She breathed in, out. The morning came through the window, the July sun filling the room the way July sun fills rooms, completely, without apology, laying itself across the floor in a wide, bright path. Elinor sat in the chair by the window and let it come. No one asked her not to go. Looking back later, she would find this the most remarkable thing about the day, not the ceremony itself, not the gray dress she changed into, not the carriage she hired from the village or the expression on the driver's face when she gave him the destination rather than the church door. The most remarkable thing was that her parents did not try to stop her. Her father came to find her at 11 o'clock, an hour after Edward had left the house. She was still in the drawing room. She had moved from the chair to the window ledge and then to the settee and then to a position standing at the mantelpiece with her hand resting on it, not quite supporting herself but not quite not. She was looking at a small porcelain figure that had been on that mantelpiece since she was a child, a shepherd blue coat crook in his hand, a patient look on his painted face. She had never noticed before that he looked patient. Her father stood in the doorway. He looked at her, she looked at him. "Elinor," he said. "I'm going to go to the church," she said. A silence, very long. Her father's face did something in that silence that she would not describe later, even to herself. "All right," he said. "Not to stop anything." She looked back at the shepherd. "I don't know what I need to see it." "I understand," he said. He did not ask whether she was sure, he did not say she did not have to. He had said those things already upstairs, and he was a man who did not repeat himself unnecessarily. Her mother appeared behind him in the doorway. The expression on her mother's face was one Elinor had never seen there before, a rawness that was beyond management, beyond the usual careful performance of emotion that her mother applied to difficult things. She looked like a woman who had been struck by something. "I'll get dressed," Elinor said. She went upstairs. She changed out of the dressing gown. She put on the gray dress she wore for ordinary occasions, not formal, not festive, just a good gray wool dress, summer-weight, practical. She sat at the dressing table and looked at the ivory dress hanging in the wardrobe. She had not touched it. She looked at it for a moment. She left it where it was. She repinned her hair. She took her gloves from the drawer. She looked at herself in the mirror, gray dress, hair up, gloves in hand, the composed face, the upright posture that was also a kind of manners, and she thought, all right then. She went downstairs. Her mother met her in the hall with an expression that was trying very hard to be composed and failing in the small muscles around the eyes. "I could come with you," her mother said. "No," Elinor said. She said it gently. "Please don't, I need to do this alone." "Elinor." "Mother," she stopped in front of her. She took one of her mother's hands in both of hers. Her mother's hands were warm and dry and completely familiar, the hands she had held as a child, the hands she had watched braid her hair, set the table, press the keys of the piano that Clara now owned so fully. She held them for a moment. "I am going to be all right." "I know," her mother said, in a voice that meant she did not know. "I do know it," Elinor said. "I can feel it. It is not a comfortable feeling yet, but it is there." Her mother pressed her hands, then let go. Elinor went out to the carriage. The church was 12 minutes from the house by carriage. Elinor had been to this church for 30 years, for Sunday services, for christenings and weddings and funerals, and the village festival in August and the Christmas services when the pews were full, and the candles were lit, and the singing was always better than you expected. She knew the church the way you know a place that has always been part of the landscape of your life. She did not go to the main entrance. She asked the carriage to stop at the lane that ran along the side of the building. She got out. She walked along the side path to the small side door that was used by the choir and the flower arrangers and the vicar when he came in on weekday mornings to do whatever vicars did in churches on weekday mornings. She opened the door. Inside, the church smelled of stone and candle wax and the particular clean, cool smell of old buildings in summer. The light came through the east windows in long, pale slabs, exactly as she had known it would. There were perhaps 60 people in the pews, friends of the families, neighbors, the relatives who had come from a distance and were now sitting in their wedding finest with the slightly arrested expression of people who have arrived expecting one thing and are beginning to sense that something else is happening. The murmur of 60 people waiting who have begun to notice they are waiting more than they expected to. Elinor walked to the last pew on the right. She sat down. No one appeared to notice her, or if they noticed her, they were uncertain enough about what they were seeing to decide not to acknowledge it. A woman they knew in a gray dress on her own wedding morning, sitting in the back of the church. The mind did not organize this easily. She looked at the altar. It was dressed with flowers, Clara's flowers, the arrangements from the neighbor's garden, white and soft yellow, very beautiful. The candles were lit. The vicar stood near the vestry door with the particular expression of a man who has been told something unexpected and is managing it with professional calm. She looked at Edward. He was standing near the front, turned slightly away from her, speaking in a low voice to a man she recognized as his solicitor. He had the wedding clothes on he had changed, she realized, after leaving the house, had gone somewhere and changed into them. He looked in those clothes the way he had always looked, tall, contained, the coat that fitted him exactly. His face in profile was doing that double thing again, present and somewhere else. The present part was managing. The somewhere else part was where the real activity was happening. She wondered what he was feeling. She thought more than he shows, probably. He has always felt more than he shows. She thought, that is what I liked best about him, and I will probably always like it. She looked at the doors. They were the main doors at the far end of the church from her, and they were open, and the light came in through them. She was looking at the light when the people near the doors shifted, and she heard the change in the room's atmosphere, that collective breath-holding that happens when something everyone has been waiting for is about to appear. Clara came through the doors. She was in white. Not the ivory of the dress that was hanging in Elinor's wardrobe, a true white, a different fabric, hastily arranged but not looking it. She had flowers in her hair. She was walking on their father's arm, Elinor's father, who was walking beside Clara with the steady ceremonial pace of a man doing the right thing in terrible circumstances, because the right thing was what he knew how to do. His face, when Elinor saw it, was the most difficult thing she looked at in the church that morning. He was looking straight ahead. He was composed. He was performing the ceremony that had been asked of him with the grace and care he brought to difficult performances. He had not told Elinor he was going to do this. He had let her go to the church without telling her that he was going to walk Clara down the aisle. It was not a deception. It was the mercy of someone who knew that some things cannot be prepared for and should not be. She watched her father walk her sister to the altar. She watched Clara, the wide eyes, looking at Edward, looking at nothing else, The way people in those moments look at the one thing that is real to them. Clara was afraid. Alina could see this and could also see what was underneath the fear, which was a certainty that was very different from the kind Alina had spent 7 years carrying. It was not patient or composed. It was not measured. It was the certainty of someone who had stopped asking herself whether she was right to feel what she felt and was simply feeling it fully in the middle of a church in front of 60 confused people. Alina sat in her pew and watched. She sat very still. This was not the careful stillness of waiting, the practiced containment of 7 years. This was different. This was the stillness of a woman who is watching something very large and very true happen, and who has understood that what you do with the large true thing is let it pass through you rather than brace against it. She let it pass through her. It hurt. She would not pretend it did not. It was the specific hurt of a thing she had carried for a long time and loved in her way, and had built her sense of the future around, and that thing was now standing at an altar with her sister, and turning toward her with that expression, the real one, the younger one, the one she had seen briefly at dinner months ago, and it was unambiguously real, unambiguously what it was. But she sat with the but for a moment, because she had not expected it. But it was also true. It was truer than what she had accepted. It was truer than I love you as a person I deeply respect and admire. It was the real thing, happening between two people who had not planned it and could not have stopped it, and there was something in the bare honesty of it, the wreck it had caused, the damage it had done to the careful plans of a summer. There was something in all of that which was at least the truth. She had been willing to accept less than the truth for the sake of the life she thought she wanted. She understood this, sitting in the last pew on a warm July morning, watching her younger sister marry the man she had waited 7 years for. She understood it with a clarity that was almost peaceful. The ceremony was brief. She left before the vows were finished. She had seen enough, she had seen what she came to see, and she did not need the formal conclusion of it. She walked back down the side aisle very quietly and out through the side door and into the summer morning. The church sounds followed her, the faint voice of the vicar, the movement of people in pews, and then the side door swung closed behind her and there was only the lane, and the carriage waiting 50 yards along it, and the sky, which was doing what her mother had hoped it would do, being beautiful. She walked to the carriage. She got in. She sat in the carriage for a moment before telling the driver where to go. The carriage was still, the horse patient and bored. The July sun came through the window. She thought about what she had felt in the last pew, not the grief. She knew what grief felt like, she had felt it and would feel it again. The other thing, the thing she had not expected, the thing that had arrived alongside the grief like a bird arriving at a window you did not know was open. Possibility. She had felt it in the drawing room at 10 o'clock, sitting in the chair after Edward left. She had not trusted it then. She trusted it slightly more now because it had survived the church, had survived the white dress and the flowers and her father's face at the altar, and was still there, small but present, like the first light before dawn which you can see even when you are not sure you believe in the morning. She told the driver to take her home. Home was where she could start. She did not know what she was starting. She did not need to know yet. She had learned in 30 years of life and 7 years of waiting that the knowledge of what you are starting tends to arrive after you have already begun, and that beginning without the knowledge is frightening and also the only honest way. The carriage moved. She looked out the window at the lane, at the hedgerows going by, at the summer countryside that she had known her whole life, and that looked, in the strange clarity of that morning, like something she was seeing for the first time. There was anger in her too. She would not pretend there was not. It had arrived toward the end of her time in the church, not an explosion, nothing that spilled over the edges of herself, but a clean, hard thing, like something clarified. 7 years. 7 years of her particular faith, her particular patience, her particular willingness to hold something in cupped hands and not put it down even when her arms were tired. The anger was sweet, in the way anger is sweet when it is the honest response to an honest thing. It was something she could hold. It had edges. It was familiar. She had never been comfortable with soft things. She had always understood edges better, and this anger had such a clean edge that she almost welcomed it. She breathed around it. It steadied her. The carriage pulled up to the front of her father's house. Alina stepped out. The house looked the same as it had when she left an hour ago. Of course it did. Houses did not change their appearance because of the events that passed through them. The roses were the same. The stone was the same. The windows of her room looked down from the second floor the same as always. She went inside. The hall was empty. Her mother was somewhere upstairs, probably crying privately the way she cried, in neat self-contained waves before recomposing herself. There was nothing to be done about that right now. Alina went to the kitchen and asked for tea. The cook, who was a woman of 60 who had worked in the house since Alina was 8 and had therefore seen most things life had to offer, brought the tea without comment and without the expression that Alina had been steeling herself for pity or sympathy, or the particular look of someone who does not know what to say but feels they should say something. She just brought the tea and set it down and went back to her work. Alina sat at the kitchen table and drank it. She sat there for a long time after the cup was empty, in the kitchen that smelled of bread in the summer morning, and she felt the day around her, this particular day, the 1st of July, the day she had not gotten married, the first day of the part of her life that she could not yet see the shape of. She looked at the kitchen table, the grain of the wood, the familiar cup. She had sat here thousands of times. She would sit here again. She did not know what would change and what would not, and she would not try to know today. Today she was just going to sit here and drink her tea and breathe. Everything else could wait. The world did not stop. This was the part no one warned you about. Alina had always known, in the abstract way you know things you have not yet experienced, that life continued after terrible things, that the sun came up and the milk needed collecting and the accounts needed doing and the neighbors knocked on your door with covered dishes and meaningful expressions, and that you dealt with all of it, one item at a time, and that time passed. She had known this. She had not known what it felt like from the inside. From the inside it felt like being asked to participate in a play you had not rehearsed, in a language you spoke perfectly but did not want to use. You opened your mouth and the right words came out. Thank you, I am well, yes it has been warm for July, no the garden is doing very nicely this year, and you closed your mouth again and went on with the next thing, and the play continued, and you continued in it. And outside the play, in some room of yourself you could only visit briefly, the real feeling was doing whatever real feelings do when there is no time for them. The week after the wedding was the hardest week. Not because anything dramatic happened, nothing dramatic happened, precisely because nothing dramatic happened. The household resumed its normal patterns with the slightly forced quality of people who have agreed not to discuss the main thing but have not quite succeeded in acting naturally about it. Her father appeared at breakfast and read his newspaper and said ordinary things. Her mother managed the household and visited the neighbor and directed the cook and was, Alina noticed, relentlessly practical, which was her mother's way through things and was also, Alina was beginning to understand, a form of love. Clara and Edward had gone. They had left the village that same afternoon, the day of the ceremony, going to Edward's property in the north, where they would begin whatever they were beginning. This was, in practical terms, a relief. Alina was not sure she was prepared yet to encounter Clara in the village or across a dinner table, and the fact that she did not have to was something she was willing to be grateful for even when gratitude was in short supply. The village, on the other hand, did not go away. She had lived in this village for 30 years. She knew everyone and everyone knew her. They knew by the Monday after the Saturday wedding, because villages always know, the way they absorb information through some atmospheric process that has no identifiable mechanism but is entirely reliable. They knew that something had happened. They did not know exactly what, because the details that were anyone's to share were not being shared by the Voss family, but they knew enough to look at Alina in the baker's on Monday morning with the particular carefully neutral expression that people deploy when they know something and have decided to pretend they do not. Alina bought her bread, she nodded. She said it was warm for July. She went home. She went to the garden. She stayed in the garden for 3 hours, doing things that needed doing and things that did not need doing, working her way methodically along the rose beds and then along the path, and then through the kitchen garden where the summer vegetables were in full production and needed attention. She worked without hurrying and without stopping, and while she worked she did not think, or she thought only about the work, what needed cutting, what needed supporting, what the soil was telling her through its texture and color, and the way the plants were standing. This was new. She had gardened before, had always helped with the garden, but she had done it in a distracted way, her mind somewhere else, the physical work just something her body did while her mind was occupied elsewhere. Now the work was the thing itself. She was present in it in a way she had not been present in anything for a long time. She noticed this, she did not examine it yet, she simply noticed it and let it be. The letters arrived on Wednesday. She had expected letters, condolences, which was the word people used when they did not know what other word applied, because what had happened was not quite grief in the conventional sense but required something in that general direction. She read them all. She replied to none of them that week, because she did not have the right words yet and she would not use the wrong ones. One letter was different from the rest. It was from a woman named Margaret Pace, who had been at school with Alina 20 years ago and whom she had not seen since, who had somehow heard the atmospheric village process again, probably or perhaps Margaret had seen something in one of the periodic letters Alina sent to mutual acquaintances, and who wrote with the specific, unadorned honesty of someone who has decided not to perform sympathy, but to offer something more practical. Margaret's letter said, "I read that something has happened. I don't know the details and I don't need to. I wanted to write because I remember you from school as someone who was always paying close attention to everything and very rarely said what she actually thought. I suspect that has not changed. If you would ever like to come to stay in Oxford, where I now live and teach, the offer is open. The city is very good for walking and there are quite good libraries." Alina read this letter twice. She folded it and put it in the pocket of her dress rather than in the wooden box, because the wooden box was where she kept things from a life she was no longer sure she was living. The anger came and went. It came in the mornings, often, when she was making decisions about small things, and suddenly felt the full weight of the years she had spent not making decisions, because she was arranging herself around someone else's timetable. It came in the kitchen when someone brought a covered dish with a sympathetic expression, because the sympathy, however well-intentioned, was a form of casting her as a victim, and she was finding that she had complicated feelings about that role. She was damaged, yes. She was grieving, yes. She was also furious at intervals in the clean-edged way she had first felt it in the church, and the fury was sometimes cleaner than the grief, easier to move in. She stopped apologizing for the anger. Not aloud, she had nothing to apologize for aloud. She was being perfectly composed to everyone she encountered. But inside, in the private room, she stopped treating the anger as a secondary emotion that needed to be managed down to something more becoming. She let it be what it was. Her father noticed the change. He noticed things her father did from behind his newspaper and his easy manner. He said nothing about it directly, but one Tuesday evening card night which had resumed, which was one of the things that had resumed quickly because it was a fixed point in both their weeks, he looked at her across the table and said, "You seem less careful." She looked up from her cards. "I beg your pardon." "You have been very careful for a long time," he said. "You seem less so. I don't mean careless, I mean less braced." She considered this. "I think I may be learning," she said, "that certain things cannot be prepared for and that extensive preparation does not help as much as I assumed." He smiled at his cards, not at her, at his cards. The slight private smile of a man who has been waiting a long time to hear something and has just heard it. "That is often the case," he said. She beat him at cards that night decisively for the first time. In the third week, she started taking the walks. She had walked before, she had always walked, it was a habit from childhood. The lanes and fields around the village were as familiar to her as the house. But these walks were different, they were longer, they went further. She left after breakfast and did not come back until the afternoon, and she went by different ways each time, not following the familiar route but striking off into the fields or along the river or up the hill to the east where the village church was visible below, and the country spread out in every direction. She did not think on these walks, or she thought, but not in the managed, directed way she had always thought, not solving problems or reviewing situations. She thought the way you think when your legs are moving and the air is fresh and there is too much space around you for thoughts to stack up neatly. They came and went, she let them. One afternoon, 3 weeks after the wedding, she walked further than she had intended and came back to the house at 7 o'clock with mud on her boots and a look on her face that made her mother stand very still in the hallway and simply look at her. "Are you all right?" her mother said. Alina thought about this question for a moment. She considered it honestly, the way she had been learning to consider things. "I am getting there," she said. Her mother nodded. She did not say anything else. She moved aside in the hallway and let Alina go upstairs. Alina changed her boots. She washed her hands. She came down to dinner and ate it and listened to her father tell a story about a dispute at the village council meeting that was apparently escalating in entertaining ways, and she found that she was genuinely interested. She found that she was hungry. She found that the food tasted like what it was. She had stopped tasting things properly some time ago, weeks, months, she could not quite trace when. The food had been food, nutrients, something you put in your body because the body required it. Tonight it tasted like the lamb and the summer vegetables and the bread the cook had made that morning. She ate everything on her plate. That night she slept for 9 hours straight, which she had not done in years. Clara's letter arrived in August. It was 2 pages. Elinor sat with it for a long time before reading it, because she knew that what was inside it would require something from her that she was not yet sure she had, and she wanted to wait until she was as close to ready as she was going to get. She read it on a Thursday morning in the garden. Clara had written carefully in the way that people write when they know they have done something that cannot be undone and are trying to find the words that do not make it worse. She had not written defensively, there was no defense offered, and Elinor noted the absence of it with appreciation. She had written with the same directness she had always had, stripped of the brightness, offering only what she actually felt rather than what was easier to say. The letter said, among other things, "I am not asking you to forgive me. I am not sure I deserve it, and I am not sure it is possible, and I am not sure that asking for it would be anything other than selfishness. I am writing because the alternative is silence, and silence seems worse. I want to say that I know what it cost you. I think I have always known, from that first evening when you came home from the walk with him and said nothing at dinner, and I watched your face say everything you wouldn't. I knew what it meant. I don't know what I should have done. I only know what I did." Elinor read the letter twice. She folded it and put it in her pocket. She sat in the garden for a long time, in the familiar bench under the oak tree, in the September morning that was turning now at the edges to autumn, cooler, the light different, the quality of the air beginning to shift in the way it shifted in September, the year starting to think about what it was going to do next. She thought about what Clara had written. She thought about the girl at the upstairs window, 7 years ago, watching her come home from a walk. The girl who had watched and known and grown up and become someone who had, without planning to, stepped into the space that Elinor had been holding carefully open. She was not ready to forgive, she was not even close to it. The word forgiveness sat in her mind like a piece of furniture in the wrong room, not yet having found the place it belonged. But she was also beginning to understand something that she had not expected to understand this quickly, that the thing she had been holding for 7 years, the lamp in cupped hands, the patient certainty, the faith, had not been entirely about Edward. It had been about a version of herself, a version that waited and contained and managed and arranged herself around what other people needed, and called it love and believed it. That version had cost her years. She was not sure she grieved the version as much as she had expected to. She had other versions available. She was beginning, cautiously, like someone opening a room that has been closed a long time, to see what they might look like. She wrote back to Clara. Not immediately. It took her 2 weeks to find the words, and they were not many. She wrote, "I received your letter. I am not in a position to say much about it yet, but I want you to know I read it carefully. Perhaps in time we will find a way to speak properly, not yet." She sent it. She went back to the garden. She was in the garden on the afternoon when Margaret Pace's letter arrived again, a follow-up, warmer than the first, with a specific invitation. There was a post at the school in Oxford where Margaret taught, a position helping with languages and correspondence, not teaching exactly but adjacent to it, and if Elinor had any interest, Margaret would be happy to make an introduction. Elinor read this letter in the kitchen, standing up, before she had taken off her coat. She read it twice. She thought about the garden, the rose beds she knew as well as she knew her own hands, the bench, the view from her window that had been the view from her window for 30 years. She thought about northern France. The thing she had said to Edward on a walk 7 years ago, the first honest thing she had said to him, that she wanted to see the coast of northern France, which had surprised him because he had expected something more domestic. Oxford was not northern France. But it was not here either. She put the letter in her pocket with the same hand that was still dirty from the garden, and she went upstairs, and she sat at her desk, and she wrote to Margaret Pace before she could talk herself out of it. She said yes. Oxford arrived in October, which was the right month for it. The city was stone and river and the smell of old books and wet leaves, and it opened itself to Alina in the way that cities open themselves to people who have been living too long in one place. Which is to say, all at once, with a density and variety that was overwhelming for the first week, and then began, gradually, to feel like the normal texture of the world. Margaret Pace met her at the station. Alina recognized her immediately, though they had not seen each other in 20 years. She was tall, sharply dressed, with the kind of efficient directness in her walk that suggested she had long since decided which things were worth spending time on and which were not, and that she organized her movements accordingly. She shook Alina's hand with both of hers, looked at her face for a brief assessing moment and said, "You look thinner than I expected. We'll fix that. Oxford has very good food if you know where to find it." Alina, who had not laughed properly in 3 months, laughed. The room she had been given was on the second floor of a house 2 streets from the school, owned by a colleague of Margaret's who let rooms to female academics and their associates. It was not large. It had a window that looked onto a courtyard where a very old plane tree was in the process of letting go of its leaves one at a time, with what seemed to Alina a kind of deliberate leisure. It had a desk, a bookcase, a bed with a good mattress, and a small ceramic stove that was already burning when she arrived, because the landlady, who was a practical woman named Mrs. Alderton, believed in the importance of warmth in October. It was the first room that was entirely hers. She had had rooms before: her room at her parents' house, the room she had grown up in, the room she had been sleeping in for 30 years. But that room was not hers in the way this one was hers. That room was inside a life that belonged to a household, to a family, to a pattern she had been part of since birth. This room was simply a room, and she was simply a person in it, and the blankness of that was terrifying, and also, she discovered on the first morning she woke up in it, exactly right. She lay in the unfamiliar bed and listened to unfamiliar sounds, the courtyard below, the plane tree, a church bell somewhere striking 7, and she felt the peculiar freedom of being somewhere that did not know her history. There was no one in Oxford who had watched her at dinner for 30 years and could see in the set of her shoulders what she was feeling. There was no one who had known her when she was 23 and would look at her now with the careful tenderness of people who have watched you suffer and love you for it, and also cannot quite stop associating you with the suffering. She was simply Alina Voss, who had come from Derbyshire and knew French and helped with correspondence and was, according to Margaret, very good at organizing things. She was very good at organizing things. She started the work the first Monday and found within an hour that she was well suited to it. The school was a girls' school, established 2 decades previously by women who had believed that the education of women was worth doing seriously and had organized a curriculum accordingly. The work Alina had been brought in to do was administrative as much as educational: letters to parents and institutions, French correspondence, the scheduling and coordination of the school's various departments. It required attention and accuracy, and the ability to see the shape of a large, complicated system and understand where things needed managing. She found she had been doing versions of this her whole life without knowing it. She also found herself, for the first time, in rooms full of women who spoke plainly about what they thought and what they wanted. Not all of them. There were women at the school who were as careful and managed as she had always been, but enough of them that the frankness in the corridors and the staff room had a different quality from the frankness she had grown up with, which was the kind of frankness you deployed in private, with women you trusted completely, after making sure the doors were closed. Here the doors were open, and the frankness walked through them with its coat on, ready for a day's work. Margaret was the clearest example. Margaret taught languages: French, which was excellent, and some German, and had views about literature and about education, and about the way women organized themselves in relation to what they were told they were allowed to want. And she expressed these views at lunch in the staff room with a directness that initially made Alina slightly uncomfortable, and then made her something she could not at first identify and then understood about 2 weeks in, was simply interested. "You think very carefully before you say things," Margaret said to her one afternoon. They were walking along the river. This was a habit they had fallen into, a walk on Thursday afternoons when the school day ended early and the river was low and dark and full of fallen leaves. "I always have," Alina said. "Is it useful?" Alina considered this. The honest answer was complicated. "It has prevented me from saying the wrong things," she said. "What has it cost?" She looked at the river. "The right things," she said, "sometimes." Margaret nodded once, the nod of a person who has asked a question and received the exact answer they were expecting, but was glad to hear anyway. "You should teach," Margaret said. Not just the correspondence, the actual languages. You are much more interesting than you let anyone see. I'm not sure that's true. It is. I have seen you 3 times this week forget to be careful because you were genuinely engaged in something, and in those moments, you are a completely different kind of person to talk to. Margaret stopped walking. She looked at Alina with the assessing directness that Alina had learned was not unkind, but was very exact. I don't say this to make you self-conscious. I say it because I think you have spent a great deal of time managing yourself for other people's comfort, and I think it has become a habit you're not aware of. Alina stood on the river path and felt this observation move through her the way something moves when it is accurate. The slight resistance first, the defensiveness of someone correctly described, and then the settling, the quiet of something landing in its right place. You may be right, she said. I usually am, said Margaret. It's one of my better qualities and also one of my worst. They walked on. Alina did start teaching. Not immediately. She took 3 months to settle into the administrative work and to learn the school's rhythms and to establish herself as someone who could be trusted with the practical responsibilities. But in the new year, she began taking 1 language class a week, and then 2, and she found, with a surprise that Margaret appeared not to share, that she was genuinely good at it. She had not thought of herself as a teacher. She had not thought of herself as much of anything in occupational terms, because the occupation she had been organized toward for 7 years had not required a particular skill set beyond the general accomplishment of being a capable woman in a capable household. She had the languages, she had learned French properly from a governess and had kept up the reading independently, and she had the attention, the habit of watching people and understanding what they needed before they said it. In a classroom, this combination turned out to be useful. The girls, who were aged between 12 and 17 and had the sharp social antennae of young people who spend their days in close quarters, decided within the first 2 classes that she was someone they liked. Not because she was easy, she was not particularly easy, she expected precision and she said so plainly, but because she was straight with them. She did not soften things she did not need to soften. She corrected them when they were wrong and praised them when they were right, and the praise and the correction came from the same place, which was a genuine investment in whether they learned the thing. She had not known she was invested in that until she found herself being so. The winter was good. It was a revelation in small daily ways what a good winter was. She had spent 7 winters calibrated to absence, to the measuring of 1 year's end, and another's beginning against a specific anticipated event. Winter now was just winter, cold and short-dayed and full of the particular indoor life that winter generates, the evenings by the ceramic stove with a book, the Thursday walks with Margaret along the river when the frost was on the path and their breath made clouds, the letters she wrote home to her father on Sunday mornings while the church bells rang outside the window. Her father's letters were long and affectionate and full of the village news, which he delivered with the light ironic touch he brought to village news that indicated he was aware of its smallness and enjoyed it anyway. He said her mother was well. He said the council dispute had escalated entertainingly. He said the garden was dormant but had been put to bed in good order, which was her doing, and the roses would be excellent next spring because of it. He did not mention Clara, she did not ask him to. In February, she received a letter from a different direction entirely. The letter was from the headmistress of a school in Lyon, France, who had been corresponding with the Oxford School about an exchange program for students, and who had enclosed, in the formal correspondence addressed to the school, a personal note asking whether any of the staff might be interested in spending a term in Lyon to help establish the program. Lyon was not the coast of northern France. It was, however, France. Alina brought the letter to Margaret. Margaret read it and looked up at her. Are you asking my permission? No, Alina said. I'm telling you I want to go. Margaret smiled, the rare, complete smile that she kept mostly to herself. Good, she said. Alina wrote to the Lyon headmistress. She wrote to her father. She looked up Lyon in the atlas in the school library and found it on the map, the city where the 2 rivers met, the one she had never seen and was now going to see because she had said yes to something before she could talk herself into saying no. This was new. She was doing it deliberately, this saying yes before no. She had noticed over the months in Oxford that her default response to any new thing was a careful assessment of risks, a checking of the thing against her existing plans, a consideration of how it fit. This checking habit had seemed, for most of her life, like good sense. It was good sense, but it was also the thing that had kept her on a bench in a garden while 7 years went by. She was learning to let the yes come first, let the checking come after. The spring arrived in Oxford with the enthusiasm spring always has in university cities, as if the season is aware of the audience and wants to perform well for it. The river filled up. The plane tree in the courtyard put out its new leaves with the same deliberate leisure with which it had let them go in October. The days lengthened. Elinor walked further and further on Thursday afternoons, into the fields outside the city sometimes, where the hedgerows were flowering with the small white flowers of hawthorn, and the air smelled like the beginning of something. She had a conversation about books, one Thursday in April, with a man named Arthur Felton. Arthur Felton was a lecturer in modern languages at one of the colleges, who used the same stretch of river path on his afternoon walks, and who had been nodding to her for several weeks, the nod of recognition that two people develop when they pass each other at the same time in the same place, often enough that not nodding becomes more strange than nodding. One afternoon in early April, he had stopped nodding and started talking instead, because they had both stopped at the same point on the bank to watch a pair of herons doing something peculiar on the opposite shore, and the herons had seemed to require comment. He was not remarkably tall or remarkably anything. He had the kind of face that organized itself around the eyes, which were brown and very attentive and moved quickly between whatever he was looking at and whatever he was thinking, which were often different things. He wore an ordinary coat. He carried an ordinary umbrella even when it was not raining, which she found, for no particular reason, pleasing. He had opinions about the French novel she was currently reading, the one she had been carrying in her coat pocket for a week, the cover visible, and his opinions were different from hers, and he said so without the elaborate softening that some men used, and she found this, in the way she had found it once before, a long time ago and in very different circumstances, refreshing. She walked with him for 20 minutes before they arrived at the point in the path where they habitually turned in different directions. He asked, at the parting point, whether she might be interested in discussing the book further, and she said she might be. She did not say this with the held breath of a woman who has been waiting for something. She said it with the simple openness of a woman who had a conversation she was enjoying and was willing to continue it. This was different from before, not the fact of the conversation. The conversation with Arthur Felton on a river path in Oxford was not the same as the conversation in a garden in Derbyshire 7 years ago, and she was not foolish enough to think it was. It was the quality of her own participation, the way she was in it. She was there, fully there, not arranged around a hope, not performing a version of herself shaped by what she thought was expected, not holding herself in any particular position. Just walking along a river with a man who had interesting things to say about the French novel in her pocket, and being interested in what he was saying. She turned and walked back toward the school. The river was very bright in the April light. The hawthorn was fully out, and the smell of it came across the path in waves, and she walked in it and thought, so this is what it is like. Not love, not yet, and perhaps not Arthur Felton, and perhaps not for a long time, but something that felt like a door to the room of it, standing ajar for the first time in years, and the room behind the door was not the room she had imagined. It was more open, more uncertain, more real. She walked with the open door beside her and did not try to go through it, and did not close it. She was learning to let things be what they were without deciding in advance what they meant. She was 32 years old, and she was in a city that did not know her history, and the river was bright, and the hawthorn was in bloom, and somewhere in her coat pocket was a letter from Lyon, France. She was going to France. Not eventually, in September. That evening she wrote to her father with the news. She wrote a long letter, the longest she had written in months, and in it she told him about the Thursday walks and about Margaret and about the girl in the upper form who had written an essay in French that was so good Elinor had made her read it aloud to the class. She told him about the plane tree in the courtyard and about Mrs. Alderton and about the book in her pocket. She told him that she was teaching and that she was good at it. She did not say, I am finally becoming myself. She did not need to say it. He would read the letter and know. At the end she said, I wanted to see the coast of northern France. I am going in September, William, I am going. She folded the letter and sealed it. She sat at her desk in the small room that was hers, with the spring evening outside the window and the sound of the courtyard below, and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not happiness exactly, not the bright particular happiness of 23, the lamp in cupped hands, something different, more even, more durable. The feeling of a woman who has been through a storm in a very small boat and has come to shore, and is standing on the shore now with her feet on solid ground and the sun on her face, and a very real sense of what it costs to cross open water, which she would not have had before, and which is worth having. She was not finished grieving, she did not pretend to be. The grief was still there in its room and she visited it, but she was not only the grief. She was also the woman who said yes before no. She was also the woman going to France. She went home in November. Not to stay, she had a school in Oxford to return to, a term in Lyon in the spring, a room that was hers above a courtyard where the plane tree had gone bare again. She went home for a fortnight because her father asked her to come, not urgently but with the particular warmth of a man who missed his daughter and was honest enough to say so, and because she found, to her surprise, that she wanted to. She had not expected to want to. She had left the village in October of the previous year with the particular urgency of someone who needs to get out of one place in order to understand what the place had been, and she had been afraid, on some level she had not examined closely, that going back would undo something, would pull her back into the shape she had been before, the careful, composed shape, the one that had waited. She came home and found that it did not. She came in on the evening train, which arrived at the Market Town station at 5:30 when the November dark was already full and the platform was lit with the cold yellow lamps. Her father met her. He was wearing the overcoat she had known since she was 20, which he insisted was perfectly serviceable still and probably was, and when he saw her he put his arms around her, simply, without ceremony, the way he always embraced her, briefly and completely. "You look well," he said. "I am," she said, "I really am." He stood back and looked at her face with the particular attention he had always given her face, the attention of a man who had been reading the same text for 30 years and had learned to see what was below the surface of it. He nodded once, satisfied with something. "Good," he said, and they went to the carriage. The house was exactly as it was. This was, she understood, getting out of the carriage. The thing about houses, they persisted. They held the shape of all the lives they had contained while each of those lives moved on or changed or ended, and they remained themselves, the stone and the wood and the windows, accommodating rather than insisting. Her room was her room. The hair was above the window in the plaster. She did not put flowers on the windowsill. She went to bed early that first night, the tiredness of travel and of arrival, and she lay in the familiar dark and thought about the particular quality of being in a place you know very well after a long time away. How it is both smaller and larger than you remembered, how the smallness is not diminishment but precision, how the largeness is the largeness of memory which always exceeds the physical. She slept. She went to the garden in the morning. November garden, entirely different from the garden she knew in summer and autumn. The roses were bare, cut back to the rough winter shapes that always looked, when the leaves were gone, more architectural than botanical, like something a sculptor had left partway through. The oak tree had lost most of its leaves. The bench was damp from the overnight rain, and she stood near it rather than sitting on it, her hands in her coat pockets, and looked at the garden in the November light, which was thin and honest and showed things as they were. She stood where she had stood at 23. The bench was 4 feet to her left, the wall was behind her, the rose beds, bare now, ran along either side of the path. The oak tree at the far end was the same oak tree it had always been, 30 years older than her memory of it, and looking not much different. She had come here the morning of her birthday this year and felt entirely at peace, and 3 weeks later the thing she had been building the peace around had come apart in a drawing room, and she had gone on from it, not over it, not past it in the clean sense that implied she had put it behind her, but on from it the way you go on from anything true. She stood in the November garden and felt the particular thing she had been expecting to feel when she came back here, the pull of the old life, the gravitational force of 7 years of a particular kind of waiting. She felt it clearly, without surprise. She had known it would be here. It was there, and it was smaller than she expected, and under it was something else entirely. She walked along the path. She walked the full length of the garden, to the far end where the wall met the boundary hedge, and she turned and walked back. She did this twice. The garden was not large, she covered it in 2 minutes each way, but the walking was not about covering distance. It was about being present in it, about being in the garden as herself as she was now, rather than as the 23-year-old who had sat on a bench and believed in a certainty that turned out to be shaped slightly differently than she had thought. The certainty had not been wrong exactly. She had felt something real and it had been real. But the thing she had been certain about, the specific future she had attached the certainty to, that had been a plan, not a truth. And plans and truths are not the same thing, however much you want them to be. She had learned this. She was glad she had learned it, though she would have preferred to learn it some other way. She went inside. Her mother was in the kitchen, managing something with the efficiency she always brought to mornings, and her father was in his study with the newspaper. She helped her mother with the morning's business. The accounts needed attention, as they always did, and she sat at the kitchen table and worked through them for an hour while her mother moved around her, and it was domestic and unremarkable and entirely comfortable. Her mother sat down with her own cup of tea at 9:30. They sat across the table from each other. Her mother was 61 now, a fact Elena had been aware of abstractly and was now confronted within the specific detail of a face she loved very much and had looked at for 30 years. The face had aged. She had not quite let herself see this when she was living in it every day, but from the slight distance of 6 months away she could see it clearly. The way time had done what time does to faces, adding precision to expression, making the lines that happiness had made deeper and the lines that worry had made more definite. Her mother had worried a great deal over the past year. "I owe you an apology," her mother said, unexpectedly, without preamble. Elena looked at her. "You don't?" "I do." Her mother held the teacup in both hands, not drinking from it, just holding it. "I saw things over the summer before the wedding. I saw things and I decided they were not my place to speak about, and I told myself I was being respectful of your choices, and that was partly true, but it was also partly that I did not want to say something that would cause trouble if I was wrong." She looked at Elena. "I was not wrong, and I did not say anything." Elena was quiet for a moment. "Neither did I," she said. "You were the one waiting," her mother said. "I was not. I had nothing to lose from speaking." Elena looked at the table. "I'm not sure it would have changed anything." "Perhaps not. Perhaps you would have married him anyway, knowing." Her mother paused. "But you deserved the choice." It was true. Elena let it be true. She did not soften it or defend against it. "Yes," she said, "I did." They sat with this for a moment, the two of them and the tea in the November kitchen, and then her mother said, "Are you happy, in Oxford and in the work? Are you genuinely happy?" Elena thought about this question. She gave it the full, honest attention it deserved. "I am becoming something," she said. "I think happy is inside that something, but it's not the whole of it yet. What I am mostly is awake. I feel very awake." Her mother looked at her, then she smiled, a full, real smile, not the managed kind. "That's better," she said. "That's better than happy in many ways." The 2 weeks passed in the rhythms of home. She walked the lanes she had always walked. She visited the elderly widow, who was 82 now and had survived the chest complaint and was managing with a stubbornness that was enormously reassuring. She played cards with her father on Tuesday evening and was beaten twice, which told her that she had been too relaxed. She helped with the accounts and with the correspondence and with the 1,000 small things that a household generates and requires attention for. On the last Sunday, she went to the church for the morning service. She had not been to the church since July. She was aware of this as she walked in through the main doors, aware of what the building contained for her, not just the service she had attended 30 years of Sundays, but the particular July morning, the last pew, the ivory flowers. She walked in through the main doors anyway because it was the right entrance and because she was done with side doors, with not quite going in, with managing her exposure to things. She sat in the third pew from the front. She had always sat there in the family pew when she was home. The service was ordinary. The vicar was the same vicar. The congregation was the people she had known all her life, who greeted her before and after with the warm, slightly careful manner that she had been receiving for a year, and was beginning to find less painful to return. She stood when they stood. She sat when they sat. She sang when it was time to sing, and she found that she could sing without the specific weight that had been on it the last several times she had tried. She looked at the altar, which was not dressed for a wedding. It was dressed for November, simple, a little austere, the plain seasonal arrangement that she found now much more to her taste than summer flowers. She looked at the last pew on the right. She thought about the woman who had sat there on a July morning in a gray dress, very still, watching something happen that she had spent years preparing for, and could not have truly prepared for. She understood that woman better now than she had at the time. She understood what it had cost her to walk in through that side door and sit in that pew, and she understood that it was not, as she had sometimes worried in the months after, a form of punishment she had inflicted on herself. It was more necessary than that. It was the requirement of a woman who needed to see a thing in order to finish knowing it, not just hear about it from a drawing room, not just understand it intellectually, but see it with her own eyes, let it be fully real, before she could begin to go on from it. She had gone on from it. She was going on. She walked home from the church in the November morning, which was crisp and bright and not quite warm but trying to be. The lane was familiar under her feet. The village was familiar around her. She walked through it and felt that it was hers, not in the sense of belonging to it, not as a destination, but in the sense of being part of what had made her, which was not a small thing. You did not outgrow the places that made you. You carried them with you into other places, into France and Oxford and Thursday walks along the river, and they became part of the layering of you. She passed the baker's, she passed the schoolmaster's house. She passed the lane that led to the church, and the lane that led to the fields, and the lane that led to the river path where she had walked with Edward on the second day she ever spent with him, a decade ago, talking about what she wanted. She had said she wanted to see the coast of northern France. She had nearly forgotten she had said it in the years of waiting. It had been in her, held quietly, not gone but not tended. And then when the waiting ended, she had found it again, not as a small wish but as a real direction, a thing she was actually going to do. She went to Lyon in March. She was there for 3 months. She came back in June, a year and a half after the wedding, and she came back different in the way that people come back from places that have asked something real of them, not changed beyond recognition, not remade but settled differently, more precisely herself. She stood in her parents' house the evening she returned, 2 days before going back to Oxford, and she said to her father over dinner that she was thinking of applying for a permanent teaching position at the Oxford school rather than continuing on the administrative side. Her father put down his fork. He looked at her. "Teaching," he said. "Languages, French specifically. Possibly some writing." He was quiet for a moment in the way he was quiet when he was thinking something he was going to say and did not want to rush. Then he said, "When you were 7 years old, you organized your younger sister's toys into categories and labeled the boxes. I asked you what you were doing and you said you were making sure things were in their right places." Elena looked at him. "I thought of it then as orderliness," he said. "I think now it was something else." "What?" she said. "A way of paying attention to what things were, before deciding where they belonged." She ate a forkful of dinner. She thought about this. "I think you may be right," she said. "I usually am," he said, with the gentle comedy she had loved her whole life. "It is one of my better qualities." She went back to Oxford. She applied for the position. She got it. She went to France again the following summer, on her own this time, not for the school program but privately, with money she had saved and the specific intention that she had been carrying since she was 23, and a man had asked her what she wanted, and she had answered honestly for the first time. She stood on the coast of Normandy on a morning in August, in the specific place where the land ended and the water began. The sea was very large. The wind was cold and clean and tasted of salt. The light came off the water in a way it did not come off anything inland, a flat bright light that had traveled a long distance to arrive. She stood there for a long time. She was 33 years old. She was standing in a place she had wanted to stand for 10 years and had not gotten to because she had been arranging herself around something else, and then she had gotten free of the arrangement, and she had taken a long circular route through grief and anger and teaching and Lyon and Thursday walks along a river, and she had arrived here. It was not how she had imagined arriving. She had imagined at 23 arriving somewhere like this with someone beside her. She was here alone. It was better alone. She would not have predicted that, but it was true. She breathed in the salt air. She looked at the water going all the way to the horizon where it met the sky. She thought about Elena Voss at 23, in a garden, believing in a certainty that was going to cost her 7 years, and a great deal of the most careful love she was capable of. She thought she was not foolish. She thought she was young and she was capable of very faithful feeling, and she gave it to the first person who seemed to see her, and that is not a character flaw. That is a human thing, and she did it completely, the way she did everything. She was not that woman anymore. Not because the woman was wrong, but because she had gone through the thing and come out the other side, and was now a different woman, a more specifically herself woman, who knew some things she had not known before about what she was made of. She knew she was made of patience that she could choose to deploy or not. She knew she was made of something that understood edges and honesty better than softness. She knew she was made of a capacity for paying close attention that had spent most of her life applied to other people, and was now, slowly and with the specific pleasure of a long-deferred thing, being applied to herself. She turned away from the water. She walked back up the shore path toward the village where she was staying, the small stone village with the good bread and the baker who spoke too fast, and the church with the particular light that was different from any English church light she had ever seen, more direct, less apologetic. She had dinner that evening with the retired teacher who ran the small guest house, a woman of 70 who had spent her life in this village and had strong opinions about everything and delivered them in French, so rapid that Alina had to concentrate fully to follow, which she found enormously satisfying, the way anything is satisfying when you have to be completely present to do it. She walked back to her room after dinner. She sat at the small desk by the window and looked out at the street, which was quiet now, the last of the evening's light fading over the rooftops. She thought about a letter she had received before she left Oxford. From Arthur Felton, who had left the college for a position at a school in Edinburgh, and who wrote occasionally in the comfortable way of people who have become friends through a shared river path and a shared opinion about French literature, and have decided that the friendship is worth maintaining across distance. His letters were interesting. She wrote back. Whether it was or would become anything beyond interesting letters and occasional shared walks on holidays when they were both in Oxford, she did not know. She was not arranging herself around the not knowing. She was leaving it open, the way you leave a window open on a warm night, not for any specific thing, just for the air. She looked at the street. She thought, tomorrow I am going to walk to the headland and see the lighthouse. She thought, the day after I am going to find the bookshop the teacher mentioned, the one with the old maps. She thought, next September the new students will arrive at the school, and I will teach them French with the full force of my attention, and I will be good at it. She thought, I have not yet seen northern Spain, or the Swiss mountains, or the fjords that a student described in an essay last term with such precision that Alina had held the essay for a moment after marking it, thinking, I must go there. She thought these things and felt them as real things, possible things, things that belonged to a life she was living and would go on living, that was not organized around waiting or around absence but around presence, the specific, daily, unglamorous, completely real presence of herself in the world she was moving through. She did not think, this is happiness. She thought, this is mine. She went to bed. She woke in the morning to the sound of the sea, which she could not see from her window but could hear, that low, constant, ancient sound, the sea going on without caring whether anyone was listening to it. She was listening. She dressed, she went down for breakfast, she ate the bread that was very good. She thanked the woman who owned the guest house in French, that was better than it had been a year ago, and would be better still a year from now. She went outside. The morning was clear and bright, the kind of morning that the coast produces in August when the summer is fully committed to itself, and the light came off the water in that particular way, and the air was cold and clean and tasted of the wide world. She walked toward the headland. She walked without hurrying, with her hands in her pockets, looking at what she was walking through. The grass on the coastal path was short and tough, the kind that can be beaten by salt wind for years and continue to grow, and the wildflowers in it were small and precise and entirely indifferent to being admired. She admired them anyway. She reached the headland at 9 in the morning. The lighthouse stood at the far point, white against the blue sky, the most useful kind of beautiful thing, both a signal and a shelter, visible from a great distance, built to keep people from going wrong in the dark. She stood at the headland and looked out. The sea was everywhere, the horizon was very clean. She was 33 years old. She was a teacher of languages. She had been here before, in a sense, on the bench in the garden, on the last pew in the church, at the desk in Oxford, reading a letter from a woman who had said, "If you would like to come, the offer is open." She had been here at the edge of what she knew, looking at the open water beyond it. She had always stepped back before. She had always turned around and gone home. She was not turning around. Not because the turning would have been wrong then, She had not been ready then. She was ready now, which was not a moral achievement but simply the result of having gone through the things you have to go through to be ready, and she had gone through them, and here she was. She breathed. She looked at the lighthouse. She looked at the sea. Then she turned away from the edge, not to retreat, but to continue, to walk along the headland path that went further and further until it curved back toward the village where the bread was good, and the woman spoke too fast, and the rest of the morning was waiting for her, ordinary and specific and completely, entirely hers. She walked.